Chapter 564. Time and time again, the number of his personal guards decreased. However, they were able to turn the tide of the battle and push back the Allied forces. Even Hong Jin himself had charged onto the battlefield several times. With a long sword in his hand, he chopped off the heads of at least 7 enemies. His body was covered in blood and he looked like a god of death. Starting from the city gate and extending all the way to the center of Hanoi City, the streets were filled with corpses of soldiers and injured people. The blood that flowed out from their bodies gathered together to form a river of blood. It was dark red and looked terrifying. It was because of Hong Jin's valiant resistance that the enemy's attack speed was greatly reduced. When he saw that it was time, he led less than 4,000 soldiers to the busiest part of the city. It was also the commercial street where the Jiaoji Palace was originally located. After the battle, only 4,000 out of 10,000 returned. More than half of the men were left outside. Perhaps there were some soldiers who ran away or were heavily injured. However, 60% of their strength was lost just like that. It was enough to see how intense the battle was. Under the fierce attack of Sai Shi's army, Hong Jin, who only had 10,000 men, was forced to retreat. However, the sky was already turning bright. After defeating Hong Jin, Sai Shi's confidence was greatly boosted. He personally led the Allied forces and waved the flag of the Lancang Kingdom and Jiaoji. He beat the war drums and shouted as he charged towards the commercial street. Looking from afar, the streets were filled with soldiers and soldiers. Right in front of them was the busiest commercial street in Hanoi City. It was also the most valuable commercial street in their eyes. It was said that every shop there had goods that could attract merchants from other countries. It was said that there was a Yang family bank there and the money inside was already piled up like a mountain. Let the brothers rest for a while and eat. Let's try to take this place in one battle. Sai Shi couldn't help but lick his lips and reveal a cruel smile. He said this to the captains beside him. General is mighty. The captains flattered from time to time. Although they lost 7,000 to 8,000 men in the battle last night, it was only a tenth of their 70,000 men. When they heard that there were only 6,000 to 7,000 mercenaries left, how could they still put them in their eyes? They even couldn't help but think that perhaps they could occupy the place with a single charge. At that time, wouldn't the gold and silver be at their disposal? The Allied forces temporarily stopped their attack, and using this opportunity, Hong Jin took 4,000 soldiers and retreated into the commercial street. Almost all of them were covered in blood. They had used their strength to win the respect of the mercenaries. Send the prepared breakfast to them and let them have a good rest. Songzhe, who was standing on the watchtower, couldn't help but nod silently. He was satisfied with Hong Jin's performance this time. He believed that, after this incident, the combat strength of these 4,000 people would rise to another level. Fortunately, although the commercial street was only 3 miles long, it was wide enough. Moreover, it was connected to the square of the palace, so there was enough space for these soldiers to refurbish. Now that the battle had reached this point, it was time for the real mercenaries to show their might. At 8 o'clock in the morning, when Songzhe's watch pointed to this location, the Lancang Kingdom's army finally made their move. They knew where their advantage was, so when they made their move, they pushed forward from both the north and south sides of the commercial street. The soldiers of the Allied forces, who were wearing battle suits, used their shields to open the way. They tried their best to hide behind the shields and began to move forward with heavy footsteps. Looking down from the watchtower, it gave off a feeling that a storm was coming. The workers of the Yangxia shops in the commercial street had all retreated to the palace, leaving behind only the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. They were either holding Type 81 rifles in their hands or holding bows and arrows in their hands, panting heavily. However, without exception, everyone's eyes were filled with excitement and hot-bloodedness. They were all troops that had experienced the Battle of Jiaoji, and winning with a small number was a common occurrence in their eyes. However, when the battle intent approached, they couldn't help but feel excited. Some people's hands were still trembling. After all, this was considered a passive defense, which was rarely seen in the history of the mercenaries. On the north and south towers, there were only 15 cold vanguard soldiers in the first tower. If such a force was placed on the battlefield, it would not even cause a ripple. However, in this place they had undoubtedly become the absolute main force. Right now, countless soldiers on the streets were looking in their direction, treating them as the anchor of the sea, as the wind vane. On the north watchtower, Songja slowly lowered the binoculars in front of his chest, and a serious expression appeared on his face. This time, the enemy had clearly come prepared. Not only were there iron shields at the front of the group, but there were also warlords at the back of the group. The purpose of the military commanders was to prevent the soldiers from retreating. From this point, it could be seen that they were prepared to be heavily injured by the muskets. Needless to say, this kind of enemy was somewhat scary. At the very least, they had the advantage in numbers. If they were to attack without regard for the consequences, it would be a bloody battle. After all, the number of mercenaries was too small. Only one cold vanguard platoon and 2 auxiliary battalions were armed with guns. He was a little worried, but when he thought about how the telegram had been sent out, and how the 6th young master should be here with reinforcements, he felt more confident. So what if they were few in number? Even if he was the only one left, he would fight until his last breath. A gentle breeze blew, bringing a chill to the January morning in Hanoi City. It seemed to be the sound of the war horn. The Allied army began to moving forward from the north and south. The pitch-black iron shields were like a black flood rushing at the front of the troops. Charge! Sexy's voice was like a roar from hell, dragging the pace of the war forward. On the watchtower, the platoon leader of the platoon, Lu Jian, rested his hands on the 12.7mm heavy machine gun. The muscles on his arms bulged slightly, and his eyes were filled with a strong desire to fight. His mouth was slightly open, ready to spit out the word attack at any time. Since it was the enemy's first wave of attack, of course, they had to suppress them as much as possible. This was related to the morale of both sides. Even though the enemy was prepared, especially since the black iron shields were proven to be able to block bullets from afar, they had to put in a lot of effort to suppress the enemy's morale. The advantage of the black shields was that they could block bullets, but at the same time, because of their weight, their movements were very slow. 2 long dragons formed by black shields wriggled into the firing range of the 2 towers in the north and south respectively. Now that they were in firing range, the 14 platoons around him all looked at the platoon leader, Lu Jian, as if they were soldiers waiting for the bugle call. Attack! A sonorous and forceful voice came out from Lu Jian's mouth. The 12.7mm heavy machine gun in his hand was like a tongue of flame as it let out heavy metal clanging sounds. It was like a pianist playing a beautiful piece of music. Bullets poured down from the sky like a torrential downpour. The other 14 members of the Lung Vanguard were also wielding their squad machine guns or Type 95 as they fired at the enemy below. At this moment, they were no longer laughing and joking like they usually were. Instead, their faces revealed a serious and solemn expression. Da-da-da. Pa-pa-pa. Following the gunshots from the north watchtower, the south side also responded, although it was only a platoon of platoons because they had 4.7mm heavy machine guns and 10 Type 95 squad machine guns. Their firepower looked very fierce. They didn't look down on them because of their small numbers. The bullets rained down from the sky and struck the black shield, creating bullet holes on the surface of the shield. However, most of the bullets were blocked. Only a few enemies accidentally exposed a part of their body and were unfortunately hit. They fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Ha ha ha! Did you see that? Our shields can block the enemy's muskets. Now, I order everyone to speed up and charge. General Ceci's laughter came from behind the alliance. Although Fan Yuhai had told him that Jiaoji used the shields to block muskets, he didn't see it with his own eyes, so he wasn't confident. Now that the truth was in front of him, he didn't have to worry anymore. He started to move closer to the military commander and urged the soldiers to charge forward. Bastard! Lu Jian saw through the window of the watchtower that the enemy could block the muskets and couldn't help but stare angrily. He finally knew why the 6th young master wanted them to practice their marksmanship. In the past, when he heard people say that bullets couldn't hit things, he didn't think much of it. Now that the truth was in front of him, He knew what it meant to be far-sighted. Change guns, aim and shoot. Once there's a gap, switch to the machine gun and shoot. Lu Jian quickly changed his strategy. As he spoke, he took out his Type 95 and changed it to a single shot. He aimed at an Alliance soldier who exposed his knee and pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet flew out, creating a dazzling trail of color in the air before it drilled into the knee covered in flesh. Immediately, an enemy with a metal shield knelt on the ground. Before he could stand up, he was trampled to the ground by the advancing soldiers behind him. Soon, he was turned into a pile of meat paste. The platoons learned from their platoon leader and started to shoot. The effect was not bad. One after another, the advancing enemies would be shot and fall to the ground when they exposed a gap. However, there were too many enemies. A platoon of soldiers couldn't stop their advance. Chapter 565. More and more enemies walked past the 600-meter perimeter and began to enter the commercial street. The auxiliary soldiers who were lying in ambush on both sides of the street and in the shops began to fire. Because of the close distance, the grenades in their hands finally had room to be used. Once they threw the grenades into the crowd, it was as if a small earthquake had occurred. After that, a dozen or so enemies were blown to the ground. Speed up! Seeing that the vanguard army's losses were increasing, Sari rubbed his teeth and showed a pained expression. He ordered the troops to speed up the attack. As long as they rushed into the commercial street and obtained the qualifications to engage in close combat, their advantage in numbers would be maximized. The sound of gunfire continued. The archers of the 6 temporary auxiliary battalions also began to shoot arrows, trying their best to kill the enemies that rushed in. But because there were too many enemies, and with the military supervisor behind them, it was like the waves of the sea. More and more enemies rushed in. Not only that, but the enemy's archers also began to counterattack at close range. The auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers began to suffer casualties. On the watchtower, Lu Jian watched all of this with a pair of blood-red eyes. Seeing that more and more enemies were appearing, he stretched out his hand and said, "Bring me the rocket launcher." He didn't use it before because the enemy was protected by iron shields, so the attack power would inevitably be reduced. Secondly, the distance was too far, so the power of the rocket launcher couldn't be maximized. But now that the enemy was right under his nose, he didn't have to think about these problems anymore. A 1-meter-long rocket launcher was handed to Lu Jian by a cold warrior. He carried it on his shoulder. Before firing, he said to the soldiers, "The opportunity is coming. You must seize it and make a beautiful counterattack." Yes. More than a dozen soldiers agreed without hesitation. Then, they adjusted their guns to burst mode and waited for an opportunity to appear. Lu Jian aimed at the target. Then, a flame rushed out from his shoulder. The powerful recoil made Lu Jian's body tremble. Then, the flame rushed straight into the enemy camp. After flying for about 100 meters, it hit an iron shield and exploded. The powerful flames and shockwaves were even more powerful than 10 grenades thrown together. Under the powerful force, many of the metal shields were blown away, revealing the bodies of the enemy hiding below. Fight! The dozen or so cold vanguard warriors, who had been waiting for an opportunity, fired their guns in unison. It was like a net of fire that enveloped the enemies below. Just this wave of attacks alone had killed or injured at least a few hundred enemies. Because of this, the enemy's attack had slowed down. The auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers in the commercial street could not help but feel the pressure on them lessen. They took advantage of this opportunity to eliminate the enemies that had rushed in. "Don't retreat. Keep going. If you retreat, you'll be killed." Seeing that the first wave of attacks was about to be stopped, the commanding general, Sisi, naturally had a look of unwillingness on his face. He yelled and screamed, and even killed a few soldiers who wanted to retreat. Only then did he stop the army from losing. Under the pressure of the inspectors, the Allied forces launched a new round of attacks. The mercenaries who had the chance to take a breather threw their energy back into the battlefield. Battle cries rang out one after another. It was as if at every moment, every breath, and every second, there were corpses falling down. Blood was flowing, and lives were flowing away. 9 true commanderies no weave cities dock. Several fast boats were docking here. Countless soldiers in camouflage clothes were walking to the shore from the boats. They were the soldiers of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard Army's 1st Division. After receiving the telegram from Hanoi City, Yang Chundong ordered the ships to speed up overnight. By noon of the 2nd day, they had already boarded a fast boat and arrived at the No Regimental Pier. Together with the 3 battalions of the 3rd Regiment, more than 1,300 soldiers, they completed the landing. 9 true commandery was already in the hands of the mercenaries, so the landing was naturally very smooth. When Yang Chundong also got off the boat and came to land, he raised his hand and looked at the military watch on his wrist. The time was 11:30 in the afternoon. Hurry up and get off the boat. Push the bicycle out and hurry to Hanoi City, Yang Chundong said to Beta Persei, who was following him. Next, it was up to this loud voice to inform the whole regiment. Coincidentally, Yang Chundong was preparing to escort the newly produced goods from Crimson City to Hanoi City when the news of the battle came from there. Since this was the case, of course, he would not be polite. Since someone wanted to attack him, then the best way was to fight back with 10 times the strength. More than 1,000 bicycles were unloaded from the ship. Yang Chundong hopped onto one of the bicycles and rode straight to Hanoi City. The speed of a bicycle was generally about 20 kilometers per hour. If it was a young person riding it, the speed would be even faster. It was common for them to reach 30 kilometers per hour, compared to the average speed of a warhorse, which was 12.5 kilometers per hour. It was still a bit faster. More than 1,000 people each rode a bicycle. After carrying guns and ammunition, they majestically went from No Weave City to Hanoi City. It was only a straight line distance of more than 800 li. They were confident that they could reach their destination in a little more than a day. At that time, they would be like divine soldiers descending from the sky and fiercely stabbing the enemy's back. In front of a commercial street in Hanoi City, although the sky was gradually getting dark, the flames of war still continued. From the morning until now, the battle had lasted for more than 10 hours. The streets were already filled with corpses, but the coalition forces still had no intention of stopping. Obviously, they wanted to take down this place in one go and did not want to give the mercenaries a chance to breathe. After more than 10 hours, the firepower of the mercenaries was not as fierce as before. Many of the auxiliary soldiers guarding the shops had their guns burned, so they had no choice but to put down their bayonets and give up their advantage of long-range combat to choose close combat. On the watchtower, the 30 soldiers of the Cold Front were already exhausted. When they had to continuously shoot from morning to night, it was actually a kind of torture and a test of physical strength and willpower. Quickly take a break. Come and drink some hot soup. The provincial governor, Song Zhe, led a few young men into the watchtower and brought out the hot soup that had just been prepared. The moment the aroma wafted out, the throats of several soldiers could not help but squirm. Some of them even had their stomachs growling. From morning till now, they didn't even have the time to drink water, let alone eat anything. Now that the food was served, all of them instantly felt their stomachs rumbling with hunger. Lu Jian did not hesitate and quickly drank a bowl of soup. Although this kind of soup was not as filling as some staple foods, it was easy to digest and provided calories quickly. It was the most suitable food at the moment. After gulping down a mouthful of hot soup, Lu Jian breathed out a mouthful of hot air and then asked with concern, "Governor Song, do the soldiers below have food?" "Yes, they all have food. Don't worry," Song Zhe said enthusiastically, then took the initiative to walk to a 12.7mm heavy machine gun. He looked at the enemies below who were still charging and fired a magazine of bullets. The effect wasn't very good. Most of them hit the iron shields that were raised high, but it still caused a number of injuries to the enemy. Below, what are the casualties of the soldiers below? After finishing the bowl of soup, Lu Jian picked up a Type 95 class machine gun and fired a row of bullets under the moonlight. Then his gaze fell on Song Zhe's body. Song Zhe was busy reloading the 12.7mm heavy machine gun. He did not even raise his head as he replied, "The situation is not good. In one day, more than 400 of our brothers were sacrificed and more than 300 were injured. Just from the fact that the number of casualties was more than the number of injuries, it could be seen that the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers were really fighting with their lives on the line. It could be imagined that most of the injured brothers would not be able to fight anymore. Otherwise, even if they were to die on the battlefield, they would not retreat because of their injuries. There were a total of 8 battalions of auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. In just one day, the casualties reached a quarter of them. From this, it could be seen how fierce and cruel the battle was. Even though Lu Jian was already mentally prepared, when he heard this answer, he could not help but be stunned. Then he suddenly stomped his feet. These Lansong people should be stabbed 1,000 times. When the 6th young master arrives, we must teach them a lesson. That's right. Not only must we teach them a lesson, we must also destroy their country like we did to Jiaoji. Song Zhe said hatefully. Originally, the situation in Yunnan province was getting better day by day, especially in Hanoi City. If it continued to develop like this, it would not be long before it became a bustling city. But in this battle, who knows how many things were destroyed? It would take at least 2 to 3 months to recover. Seeing his political achievements being destroyed like this, as the highest-ranking officer here, Song Zhe's anger was obviously bigger than anyone else. But it was too early to say these things. They must first hold on until the 6th young master arrived with reinforcements. Once this place was attacked by the enemy, they would only die. Then wouldn't it be unnecessary to talk about the future? Governor Song, how long will it take for the 6th young master's reinforcements to arrive? Lu Jian changed the question. The soldiers who were firing at the side could not help but stop their actions at this moment. It was obvious that they were also concerned about this matter. Song Zhe did not know that Yang Chendong received the telegram on the ship, nor did he know about the appearance of the bicycle. His expression turned ugly. I estimate that the 6th young master will arrive with reinforcements in about 10 days. Previously, he said about 7 days to stabilize the morale of the soldiers. But now that he was facing the most elite soldiers of the cold front, there was no need to hide anything. In fact, he had to be honest and let them prepare for a long battle. Chapter 566. 10 days. Lu Jian took a deep breath when he heard the answer. He knew that 10 days of reinforcements was the best they could hope for. However, as the platoon leader and the only officer here, he forced a smile on his face. It's only 10 days, no problem. We can definitely hold on because we are the most elite cold vanguard. Yes, it's only 10 days, we can definitely hold on. The soldiers were also filled with confidence because of the platoon leader's aura. Only Song Zhe, who was still reloading, had a red face. Would the 6th young master really be able to bring reinforcements in 10 days? On the other side of the commercial street, General Cici was also sitting on a large chair prepared for him by his personal guards. The casualty statistics had just been sent in. In just one day of attacks, the number of casualties had reached 13,000. When he saw the results, he couldn't believe it. If he were to continue fighting like this, wouldn't his 70,000 soldiers only be able to hold on for 5 to 6 days before they would all be buried here? Of course, this wasn't correct. After all, it was the first day of attacks. The enemy's muskets could unleash their full power. If he continued to attack with fatigue, even if his body was made of iron, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. Needless to say, muskets required bullets. If they continued to shoot, would the enemy have enough bullets? Since they had already come this far, there was no reason to retreat now. If they did, all their previous efforts would be wasted. Ceci forced himself to calm down and said to the captains beside him, "Pass down the order. Send a small group of soldiers to continue the harassment strategy. The rest of the soldiers should take advantage of the time to rest. When the sun rises tomorrow, we will attack again. No matter what, we must take down this place by tomorrow morning." It was only a commercial street 3 miles away. Ceci was already prepared to cover the ground with corpses. He didn't believe that they wouldn't be able to take down this place by then. He had an absolute advantage in numbers. his soldiers could get a good rest. Even if he had to exhaust them, he would exhaust the 3,000 mercenaries to death. That night, gunshots were constantly heard. In such an environment, it was naturally difficult for the mercenaries to get a good rest, especially when the enemy would suddenly launch an attack when they wanted to rest. There were 2 times when the enemy almost rushed in. At dawn the next day, the enemy launched another fierce attack. 10,000 men and horses were gathered on both the north and south roads. It looked like they were going to charge into the business district at once. In order to deal with such a huge attack, the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers sacrificed another 500 men to stabilize the situation. When the battle once again reached the night of the same day, almost all of the original 8 battalions were injured, and only 3 battalions were still able to fight. Even the cold vanguard platoon on the watchtower lost 3 soldiers. They were all injured by stray arrows. After all, when 100 arrows were fired at the same time, there would always be a few that would enter the watchtower through the window. Even platoon leader Lu Jian's left arm was hit by an arrow. The bodies of the 3 fallen comrades were carried to the side, leaving the other cold vanguard soldiers with endless fighting spirit instead of sorrow. They were all prepared to die for a noble cause. That night, when Songzhi came to deliver dinner, they all wrote their wills. After all, they did not know when the reinforcements would arrive. Looking at the current situation, not to mention 10 days, they might not even be able to defend for a day or 2. Don't worry, I will arrange for these wills to be kept safe. They will definitely be delivered to the 6th young master. If you die in battle, it will not be in vain. Your families will be taken care of by us, and your revenge will be taken by us. Songzhi kept the wills in his arms as he spoke with tears in his eyes. After a day of attack, the Allied forces also suffered heavy losses. Another 10,000 men were lost. Fortunately, they could see that the mercenaries were at the end of their rope. Sisi began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. At that time, he would launch the final attack. By tomorrow at this time, they would definitely be able to take down the business district and occupy the entire Haniai city. They would be able to announce their victory to the world. The torrent of bicycles continued to move forward in the darkness. Every bicycle had a glowing flashlight tied to the front. At this moment, they were under the leadership of Yang Qindong and were rushing towards Haniai city. The ones riding at the front were Yang Qindong and his men. The 6th young master, who was usually calm and collected, did not say a word at this moment. He focused all his strength on his legs. Fortunately, the quality of these bicycles was very good. Every one of them was man-made. Every small part was polished many times before being used. They would definitely not drop the chain at a critical moment. Once one learned how to ride such a thing, one could control it with one hand. They even ate while riding. Other than 2 hours of rest and 15 minutes for toilet breaks and recovery, they were basically always on the road. Knowing that the situation in Haniai city would not be good, under the leadership of Yang Qindong, a group of cold warriors rode from noon yesterday to the next day. They rode for more than 800 miles in 30 hours. Excluding the time for rest and sleep, their average speed was more than 25 kilometers per hour. Finally, they arrived at the outskirts of Haniai city in the middle of the night. It was here that they could see flashes of fire from time to time from afar. Needless to say, that must be the center of the battlefield. Young master, let's do it. Tiger's Mane's eyes were fixed on the city. His fists were clenched tightly. It was obvious that he was furious at the moment. The 2nd Regiment's cold vanguard warriors were also quickly gathering. The various battalions, companies, and platoons were checking their numbers and equipment. Although they were tired from the journey, they were still prepared to fight as soon as the order was given. Yang Qindong, whose eyes were shining from time to time, nodded. The earlier they entered the city, the less pressure Songzhi and the others would face. However, the choice of how to attack the city was also very important. Although attacking now was indeed unexpected, he did not want to scare the enemy away. He wanted all of them to stay here. Therefore, he needed to plan carefully. Direct company, stay behind. The rest of the soldiers should take the time to rest. 3rd Commander Wu Shang strode over and stood at attention beside Yang Qindong. Direct Company Commander Wu Shang reporting for duty. Why? Are you afraid that there won't be a battle to fight? Yang Chundong did not know what to say when he saw the dignified regiment commander taking on the responsibility of a company commander. Isn't it more enjoyable to fight with the sixth young master? Wu Shang blushed and smiled. This was snatching military merit in front of the sixth young master. He wouldn't be unhappy, right? Yang Chundong obviously knew what kind of people these officers were, especially people like Wu Shang. It was as if he was born to fight. Once there was a battle, he would even forget about his wife and children. When it came to a big battle, he would immediately become the commander of the assault force. If you did not let him participate in the battle, it would be painful for him. Not wanting to dampen the enthusiasm of the officers, Yang Chundong did not refuse. Instead, he said, "Since you want to be the vanguard, why don't we make a bet? You take your direct company, and I'll take the first and second guard squad. Let's see who can take down the city gate first." Although the first and second guard squads had been expanded after the battle, they only had 60 people in total. The direct company of the regiment had 100 people. Wu Shang could not help but show a strong fighting spirit. "Okay, then let's compete. But sixth young master, what if we win?" Seeing how confident Wu Shang was, Yang Chundong smiled. "Hanoi City has a total of 4 city gates. If you want to beat me, you'll have to take down at least 3. Are you confident you can do it?" Wu Shang was taken aback by this rhetorical question. He didn't know how to answer. On the other hand, Yang Chundong waved his hand casually. "All right, if you can beat my guards, I'll give you 3 more machine guns later." Even for the Cold Front Regiment, each company only had 1 machine gun. If they had the chance to get 3 more, it would be equivalent to a lot of fighting power. Wu Shang was very happy. "Then, sixth young master, it's a deal." Normally, they would not dare to talk to Yang Chundong like this. However, this was the battlefield, and they had the heart to compete. Naturally, they could be more casual. "Guards, follow me." Yang Chundong was already a little impatient. After making a bet with Wu Shang, he led 60 guards straight to the south gate. Yang Chundong chose to break through the south gate first. Wu Shang began to order his direct company to choose the west gate. This was a competition with the sixth young master. Even if they could not win, they could not lose too badly. On the south gate, there were soldiers patrolling with torches from time to time. When Yang Chundong led the guards to the bottom of the city, they could even hear the voices of the Lansong Kingdom soldiers on the tower. Obviously, their defense was very lax. No one would have thought that an enemy would appear at this time. "Prepare the triangle anchor." Yang Chundong raised his head and glanced at the 10-meter-tall city gate tower. A look of disdain flashed across his eyes. With the anger in his heart, and with the help of some other items, climbing up the tower was just a matter of a blink of an eye. Usually, they were responsible for the safety of the sixth young master. Now that they finally had a chance to show off their skills, the 60 guards of the 2 small teams were very excited. Everyone wanted to be the first to show off. In the end, the 10 guards who had the best performance in climbing were quickly selected and became the first batch to climb the city. Chapter 567. Give me one. Yang Chundong reached out and took a triangular anchor from Chiu Vi's hand. He weighed it in his hand. "Young master, you can't take the risk." While Chiu Vi was still in a daze, Tiger's Mane strode over and tried to stop Yang Chundong. After all, no one thought that the sixth young master would personally take action. "What? Are you looking down on me?" Yang Chundong tied one end of the rope to his waist and casually glanced at Tiger's Mane. However, it was this calm attitude that shocked Tiger's Mane. He had been with the young master for too long. No one knew better than him what his words and actions represented. Sometimes, the calmer he appeared, the more it proved that he was really angry. Tiger's Mane didn't dare to say anything. Chiu Vi didn't know about this. He stepped forward and said, "Sixth young master, you can't go to the front line as a member of the assault team." As he said that, he tried to untie the rope that was already tied to his waist. A strong force suddenly hit Chiu Vi's shoulder. He couldn't help but take a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. This also made his eyes reveal a horrifying expression. When training became a habit, even standing there would be rooted to the ground. As the captain of the first guard team, Chiovi was naturally skilled. However, the sixth young master only casually bumped into him and he almost fell to the ground. It wasn't that his lower body was unstable, it was just that the sixth young master was too strong. After showing his position in action, Yang Chundong looked at the other guards who still wanted to persuade him and said, "If any of you can beat me in a one-on-one, then you can stop me. Otherwise, don't say anything." What kind of joke was this? The entire first guard squad wasn't a match for Yang Chundong even if they joined forces. Yet he still dared to challenge him to a duel. Based on this sentence alone, everyone fell silent. Beta Persei, who hadn't reacted until now, lowered his voice and grabbed a triangular anchor. He wanted to show his support with practical actions. He wanted to be in the first echelon with the young master. After Tiger's Mane reacted, he grabbed the triangular anchor to show his determination. "Okay, you're so heavy. Aren't you afraid that the rope can't hold you? If you want to go up, you'd better be in the second echelon." Other than Beta Persei being too heavy and not suitable for this kind of flexible work, the captain of the first squad, Chiovi, the captain of the second squad, Dao Xiao, and several vice-captains and squad leaders grabbed the triangular anchor respectively. They wanted to show their determination to support the sixth young master with practical actions. "Very well, hurry up. I hope you won't be a burden to me." After making a joke, Yang Chundong began to exert his strength. With a wave of his hand, the triangular anchor in his hand flew toward the top of the city wall as if it had grown eyes. Soon it was stuck at the junction of the battlements. He pulled hard on a climbing rope. After making sure that it was secure, he stretched out his feet and stepped on the battlements. His arms continued to exert strength, and his feet moved quickly. His whole body flew straight up the battlements like a monkey. So fast! Although they were mentally prepared, when they saw Yang Chundong's figure quickly disappear in front of them, the guards couldn't help but let out a sigh. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up." Tiger's Mane also looked at the battlements with everyone's gaze, but he quickly remembered his mission and threw the triangular anchor up the battlements. For a moment, the triangular anchors flew up rapidly as if they had grown eyes. Yang Chundong was the first to climb up the battlements with the help of the climbing rope. His speed was as fast as a fox, making it difficult for people to catch his speed. After jumping up the southern battlements, he flew toward a dark corner. His appearance didn't attract anyone's attention. He took a deep breath and calmed his breathing. His hand reached for his waist and a military knife appeared in his hand. Soon after, his figure flew out like a swallow in the clouds. His footsteps were extremely fast as he rushed towards a Lansong soldier who was walking around with a torch in his hand. His feet didn't make the slightest sound as he stepped on the ground. At this moment, he was like a ghost, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. When he arrived behind the enemy soldier, he still didn't raise the enemy's guard. He raised his right arm and quietly placed the stiletto on the soldier's neck. His left hand covered the soldier's mouth and pulled back, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Ugh! He instinctively wanted to struggle, but how could he be Yang Chundong's opponent? This Zhonglan Kingdom soldier's legs only forcefully kicked twice before his aura became weaker and weaker. After a breath of time, his head tilted to the side, announcing his death. After killing the nearest enemy, Yang Chundong reached out and took the torch from the other party. He stood up fearlessly and began to patrol the area just like the soldier before. However, his eyes continued to flicker as he imprinted the situation of the enemies in his mind. Then, he began to analyze and make judgments. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Tiger's Mane and the others also climbed up the tower and came to a dark corner beside Yang Chundong. Without turning his head, Yang Chundong's left hand, which was behind his back, constantly made hand gestures, telling Tiger's Mane and the others the exact location and number of enemies. "You guys go to the left, you guys go to the right. The rest of you follow me." After Tiger Mane saw Yang Chundong's hand gesture clearly, he continued to make arrangements. One by one, the guards who had climbed up the tower began to disperse, each of them searching for their own targets. The Lansong soldiers were completely unprepared. They didn't think that someone would ambush them. They were still walking around the tower. Occasionally, they would stop and chat to pass the time. In the face of such unprepared opponents, the guards were like dragons that were born. With the stabbing of their bayonets, the enemies were silently killed one by one. Every time one of them died, the torch in their hands would be replaced by another guard. In less than half an hour, almost 50 enemies on the south gate were all killed. From the beginning to the end, not a single sound was made. It was obvious how strong the guards were. "Young master, we have them under control." Tiger's mane broke the neck of the last enemy in his hands and walked to Yang Qindong's side. "Okay, leave one squad here to guard. Let them open the south gate and send more troops in. The rest of you follow me to the east gate tower." Yang Qindong said calmly, as if they had just killed a few stray dogs and not a few dozen human lives. Everyone held their torches and walked from the southern gate tower to the eastern gate tower in an open manner. Walking at the front was Yang Qindong. Taking someone by surprise would often lead to unexpected results. Perhaps no one would have thought that a person who launched a sneak attack would dare to appear so brazenly. Yang Qindong grasped this mentality. Once he got close to the enemies, they wouldn't have time to react. Why are those people coming from the south gate tower to us? What are they doing? A group of dozens of people holding torches was quickly approaching. Finally, they attracted the attention of the guards on the east gate tower. However, they were only paying attention. Everyone was just curious. No one thought that they were enemies. 30 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters. The distance was getting closer and closer. With the help of the light from the torches, the faces of both sides could be seen clearly. The guards also held their bayonets tightly and were ready to attack at any time. However, at this moment, a gunshot suddenly came from the west gate tower. A ray of light appeared. In this dark night, it was so eye-catching and so clear. When the gunshot rang out, Yang Qindong knew that something was wrong. Wuxia's whereabouts must have been discovered, and they had no choice but to use their guns. Since they were already discovered, there was no need to hide anymore. Yang Qindong fiercely threw the torch forward and immediately put away the military knife. Instead, he took out the Type 95 submachine gun that he carried on his back. Da-da, da-da-da. Without giving the enemies any time to react, Yang Qindong raised his gun and fired. Relying on his sharp senses and proficiency with firearms, every time a bullet was fired, an enemy holding a torch would fall to the ground. Attack! Behind him, Hu Mang and the others were only half a beat slower before they raised their guns and fired. Instantly, gunshots rang out, and the enemies in front of them were all annihilated in less than 3 breaths of time. "Go to the north gate tower." Yang Qindong raised his left hand and made a forward motion. Then he took the lead and rushed out. In terms of elite level, these guards who spent every day with the 6th young master were constantly trained. Especially with Yang Qindong's personal strength getting stronger and stronger, they were not willing to continue being punching bags. As the saying goes, the greater the pressure, the greater the resistance. The guards would train whenever they had time and strive to break through their personal limits. Leading such a team was really successful. On the north gate tower, there were only bursts of gunshots. There were no casualties and dozens of enemies were killed on the ground. Wuxia and the company under his direct command had just finished off the enemies on the west gate tower. The enemies on the south, east, and north gate towers were all wiped out. Close the 4 cities. Don't let the enemies escape. Yang Qindong, who gave the order, had a cold expression on his face. It was obvious that he was really angry at this moment. After the order was given, the 3 regiments of Cold Vanguard outside the city were divided into 4 groups. They guarded the 4 city gates respectively. Then they began to push from the outside to the inside. The 3 of them formed a group. Under the 3-on-3 tactic, the unprepared enemies fell to the ground one after another. Many of them did not understand what had happened until the moment they died. How could there be enemies behind them? The news that the 4 city gates leading to the outside world had fallen quickly reached the ears of the commanding general, Ceci. General, can we really do it? Why not? We still have more than 40,000 people. Even if we discount them, we still have 20,000 people left. Can't we defend the business district? At that time, we will also have the firearms of the mercenaries. What will we be afraid of? Cici said viciously. He then walked out of his bed and called for a group of guards to carry out a new plan of attack. On the watchtower, Lu Jian was sleeping with a Type 95 class machine gun. He needed to rest up and prepare for the battle at dawn. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire from afar woke him up. He took out his binoculars and looked into the distance. His face lit up. It's the reinforcements. The reinforcements have arrived. Really? Governor Songjia, who also heard the gunshots, rushed to the top of the building just in time to hear this sentence. That's right. The reinforcements must have arrived. But I don't know if they are the main force of the 6th Young Master's Lang Feng. Lu Jian said with uncertainty. After all, it had only been 2 days since the telegram was sent. How could they arrive so quickly? Speaking of which, if the telegram wasn't out of power, they would have received the telegram from Yang Chundong. No matter who they are, as long as they are reinforcements, they are our hope. But we still have to prepare for the worst and prevent the enemy from launching a fierce attack. Songjia couldn't be sure that the reinforcements were the main force of the 6th Young Master and the Lang Feng. But no matter what, there was still hope. Just as Songjia finished speaking, one of the Lang Feng soldiers said, "The enemy is gathering. It looks like they are really going to launch a fierce attack." Songjia and Lu Jian heard this and came to the window. They looked down and saw the soldiers of the Lansong Kingdom gathering. The two of them looked at each other in silence. Their expressions didn't look too good. But some things were already here. It was useless to be afraid. Songjia said to Lu Jian, "Platoon leader Lu, I will have to trouble you. Please try your best to stop the enemy. I will go down and inform the other units to prepare for a full counterattack." "Thank you, Governor Song." Looking at Songjia's bloodshot eyes, Lu Jian felt sorry for him. He hadn't slept for 3 days. The auxiliary soldiers, temporary auxiliary soldiers, and the Vietnamese mercenaries in the commercial street were all mobilized. More than 5,000 people gathered together. This was their last force. Victory or defeat depended on this. Just as the street was ready, the Lansong Kingdom soldiers sounded the attack horn. In the dark night, countless enemies rushed over with swords, spears, and clubs. Perhaps they knew that this was their last hope. The speed of these soldiers was faster than before. Attack, don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Attack with all your might. On the watchtower, Lu Jian held the 12.7mm heavy machine gun and kept pulling the trigger. Bullets flew out rapidly. The shells that came out of the chamber quickly formed a layer on the ground. Beside him, a few of the Lang Feng soldiers also worked together and used their machine guns to sweep the ground. At the same time, the Lansong Kingdom soldiers also fell to the ground. After 3 days of continuous fighting, the number of iron shields in the enemy's hands was very low. It was difficult for them to block the bullets of the machine guns. However, the Lang Feng soldiers were too few in number. In the end, many of the soldiers still managed to rush into the commercial street. Attack! The auxiliary soldiers hidden in various places held Type 81 rifles and spat out tongues of fire. The first enemy soldiers who rushed in were turned into corpses. However, the enemy's numbers were too many. No matter how hard they fought, they couldn't break through. In the end, the enemy soldiers rushed in just like that. "Brothers, follow me and kill." With a loud shout, he took the lead and charged out with his blade. Behind him, there were thousands of soldiers and Vietnamese mercenaries, and they let out loud shouts as they clashed with the soldiers of the Lansong Kingdom, unfolding the cruelest and most cold-blooded hand-to-hand combat. Scythes clanged, swords hacked, spears stabbed, axes and hooks hacked. Soon, the place became a purgatory. Blood, broken limbs, and corpses were everywhere. The Lang Feng 3rd Regiment was like a ferocious tiger rushing down the mountain from the city gate towards the center of Hanoi City. Following them were tens of thousands of educated youths from Chichen City. Of the 50,000 youths who were sent here at the beginning, There were only about 10,000 of them left in Hanoi City. When the battle broke out, they tried their best to hide. Although they were unarmed and wanted to kill the enemy and serve their country, they knew their mission and responsibility. Without a plan, they would only be courting death if they rushed out. When the Cold Vanguard Regiment appeared, they quickly gathered together and followed behind the Cold Vanguard Regiment. They took all kinds of weapons from the dead enemy soldiers and charged towards the commercial street with the Cold Vanguard Regiment. At the front of the charging army, Yang Chendong took the lead. Every time he fired a shot with the 95 style, an enemy would fall to the ground. With the existence of that qi, his perception was at least 3 times stronger than that of an ordinary person. These advantages made him like a fish in water. In just a short while, the number of enemies who had died at his hands had exceeded 100. Young master, slow down. Young master, be careful. Tiger's Mane followed behind Yang Chendong with 2 guards. A gentleman would not stand under a collapsing wall. Logically speaking, Yang Chendong should not be allowed to participate in such a chaotic battle. However, none of them could catch up to the 6th young master. All they could do was follow closely behind and strangle all dangers in the cradle. This slowly turned them into a sharp knife, stabbing directly into the enemy's heart. Behind them was the main force of the Lung Feng 3rd Regiment. Commander Wu Shang was already sweating profusely. Previously, when they were attacking the city, they were accidentally discovered by the enemy and had no choice but to take the initiative to fire. Even so, they only managed to take down the west gate of the 4 city gates. The battle for the city gates was already over. This made Commander Wu Shang very depressed. However, they were still left in the dust by the 6th young master in the battle inside the city. As a self-proclaimed elite, he could not accept this. He yelled and urged the Cold Spear warriors to speed up, turning into a torrent that charged straight into the city center. Whether it was Yang Chendong's troops or the 2nd Regiment of the Lungfeng, they were all too fast. They were so fast that the Lansong Kingdom soldiers did not even have time to form an effective defensive line before they killed their way over. Then, they broke their formation and forced countless enemies to flee. Those who were too slow to run simply threw down their weapons and knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong passed by the spineless and kneeling surrendered soldiers and continued to lead the charge towards the commercial street near the palace. Behind Yang Chendong were a few dozen guards. Although they tried their best, they realized that they were getting further and further away from the 6th young master. Behind the guards was the 3rd Regiment of the Lung Feng led by Commander Wu Sheng. In comparison, although they tried their best, they were still at least 300 to 400 meters away from the guards. Behind them were the educated youths from Chichen City. At this moment, they finally had a chance to use their skills. The work of reorganizing the kneeling captives would be done by them. Chapter 569. The gunshots never stopped from night till dawn. When a white light slowly rose from the horizon, Yang Chendong was already 1 kilometer away from the commercial street. It was obvious that there was a group of people shouting here. After dodging to a corner, Yang Chendong took a deep breath. Then, he loaded a new magazine with the Type 95 in his hand. He couldn't remember how much ammunition he took out from the warehouse. Young master. During this pause, Tiger's Mane and the others finally caught up. Then they leaned against the corner to rest. This night, they had been killing enemies and chasing after the 6th young master. They didn't feel anything before, but now that they had a chance to rest, the fatigue immediately filled their bodies. How is it? Very tired, right? Bear with it, the battle will be over soon. Yang Chendong's gaze swept over the team members and revealed a smile. Yang Chendong had been charging at the front line all this time. He should be far more tired than the others. In particular, his perception had always been in a very tense state. Because of the existence of the key, he felt tired, but it wasn't that strong. On the contrary, he could feel that the key was stronger than before, and even faintly felt that it was getting bigger. This made Yang Chendong very curious. He wanted to know if there was a limit to this key, and where the limit was. The other team members didn't know what the 6th young master was thinking. After receiving encouragement, everyone's fatigue suddenly decreased by half. Each of them puffed out their chests, showing that they could still fight. Okay. Check your weapons and equipment, and prepare for a surprise attack. Yang Qindong's eyes were smiling. It was as if they weren't going to kill people, but to have fun. After fighting for a night, the team members didn't have many bullets left. They weren't like Yang Qindong, who owned a large warehouse and had the world's largest arsenal behind him. But the remaining bullets were no problem for a round of attack. All right, let's count to 5 and charge together. Seeing that all the soldiers were looking at him with inquiring eyes after checking their weapons, Yang Qindong suddenly said with a heroic spirit, 5, 4, 3, 2, charge. When Yang Qindong counted to 2, his figure had already stood up. With the word charge, he was the first to appear on the main street. Then, the 95 style in his hand spewed out a tongue of flame, directly killing the enemies on the street behind him. This enemy troop was General Sexy's headquarters. He was reprimanding the captains and Kiliarchs under his command as the battle was going badly. Who would have thought that an enemy would suddenly appear behind him? Da-da-da! Gunshots rang out one after another, and the unprepared Lansong soldiers fell to the ground like sliced chives. The gunshot attracted Cece's attention. What's going on? Why are there enemies behind us? Where are the troops we arranged to stop the enemy? It was no wonder that Cece was so panicked. At the beginning of the battle, he arranged for 3 Kiliarchs and 3,000 soldiers to guard behind him. He thought that it was foolproof, but who knew that they were already scared out of their wits by the mercenaries? They either escaped from the city or found a place to hide. Some even surrendered and became captives. They were really frightened by the strength of Yang Qindong and the others. The gunshots didn't stop because of Cece's confusion. On the contrary, it continued. When the distance was close, a group of soldiers threw out the grenades at their waists, causing the ground to rumble. The distance between the two sides was about 200 meters. This was the most effective distance for firearms. On the other hand, the weapons in the hands of the Lansong soldiers were like toys in the hands of children. They were not of any use at all. Hold on, hold on. Cece was caught off guard by Lung Feng's sudden appearance. Only when many of the soldiers in his line of sight had fallen to the ground did he react. He loudly gave out orders as he fled to a nearby street under the protection of his personal guards. The mercenaries in the commercial street were getting weaker and weaker after a few rounds of attacks. Originally, 1 or 2 more attacks would have been enough to clinch victory. The sudden appearance of the cold front made Cece's plan fall through. He had no choice but to escape to another place. Humph! Want to run? Yang Qindong's eyes spat out flames of anger. With his inhuman eyesight, he naturally saw that there was a general wearing golden armor among the people escaping. If he guessed correctly, he should be the leader of the mercenaries. If he didn't encounter him, it would be fine. But since he encountered him, there was no reason to let him escape. He ran as if he was flying. With a leap, he jumped onto the roof of a house and threw out a sentence to Tiger's Mane behind him. I'll chase after the enemy. You guys are responsible for cleaning up this place. With that, Yang Qindong disappeared from the sight of Tiger's Mane and the others. Everything happened too quickly. In addition to a night of killing, even Tiger's Mane and the others felt a little exhausted. They definitely couldn't keep up with the young master's speed. Qiu V, Dao Xiao, you guys are responsible for settling the matters here. Beta Persei, let's go. Even though he was very tired, Tiger's Mane still decided to chase after him. This was a display of loyalty. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei left. Behind them, a few members of the first guard team followed. Ba Dao Jiang, Pang Yu and the others were among them. Their thoughts were the same. They absolutely couldn't let the 6th young master take the risk. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that they were physically exhausted, they would have followed behind Yang Qindong. Cece naturally didn't know that he had been targeted. When he left a group of people to guard the place, he thought that he was already safe. So when he walked to another street with nearly 100 of his personal guards, his originally nervous heart had already relaxed. It was early in the morning, and the battle in the commercial street had already lasted for 3 days. The people in the vicinity had already fled. On a relatively spacious street, there was only Cece and nearly 100 of his subordinates. Humph! This time we were unlucky. The mercenaries came just in time. But it doesn't matter. After this battle, at least we know that they are not invincible. After I leave the city and regroup, they definitely won't be so lucky the next time they come. Cece's face was unconvinced. It seemed like he was cheering for his subordinates, but it also seemed like he was cheering for himself. While walking, Cece said this. That's right. With the general's divine power, even the mercenaries are no match for you. Immediately, a personal guard flattered him. Ha ha ha. Hearing the flattering words of his subordinates, Cece laughed and completely forgot that he was scared shitless when he saw the mercenaries. This army that didn't look like a failure at all was actually laughing at this time. It looked so discordant. At this moment, an even more discordant voice exploded above their heads. Bah! It's just a group of clowns. How dare they boast so shamelessly? Who is it? Who is it? Where is he? As soon as they heard the reprimanding voice, Cece and the others quickly looked over and saw Yang Chendong standing on a 5-meter-high roof. Of course, they didn't know who Yang Chendong was, but they could see that the opponent was only one person. Although this person was holding a firearm that they had never seen before, 100 people against one person still gave them enough courage. Humph! You're only one person and you still dare to show your face. You really don't know how to write the word, death. Come, let's attack together. Cece's eyes flashed with a fierce light. His gaze was more focused on the firearm in Yang Chendong's hand. He thought that this battle was already over, but if he could snatch an advanced firearm, then this trip would be worth it. The fact that 100 people could fight one person gave the other personal guards a great deal of confidence. After receiving the general's order, they clamored and surrounded the rooftop. You don't know the meaning of death. Yang Chendong stood on the rooftop like a god, looking at these people with swords and spears who wanted to surround him. His eyes flashed with a strong murderous intent. Then he raised the gun and fired at a few personal guards who were climbing up the rooftop. Bang! A loud sound was heard, followed by the sound of a small landmine explosion. The pitiful personal guards who were climbing up the rooftop didn't even know what was going on before they were blown away. The personal guard who was hit by the gun was directly blown into pieces. His flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Yang Chendong was holding a shotgun in his hand, and it was the latest model. The power of a small cannonball was not just for show. When this shot was fired, the range of the shot encompassed a radius of 4 to 5 meters. How could swords and spears block this shot? One shot actually had such a shocking effect. Cece's mouth suddenly opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. Could be seen how shocked he was at this moment. The other personal guards weren't any better. A few personal guards who wanted to climb up the rooftop in another direction suddenly stopped their actions. Then they stood there helplessly, not knowing what to do. They didn't know what to do, but Yang Chendong could teach them. They saw the muzzle of the gun turn, and the next shot was already in front of them. Bang! A large hole appeared on the rooftop. Naturally, no one who stood there was lucky enough to escape. If they weren't dead, then they were injured. Oh my God! The power of the shotgun scared them. After seeing the power of 2 shots, none of the personal guards thought of taking Yang Chendong's life. On the contrary, each of them quickly found a place to hide. At this moment, Yang Chendong, who was alone, was not a soft persimmon to be pinched. He was like a fierce tiger in the forest, opening his mouth and swallowing their lives. Chapter 570. Pong, pong, pong. Shot after shot, hitting the bodyguards who were running in all directions. One bodyguard after another fell to the ground, screaming and wailing, giving people a feeling of fear. What kind of weapon is this? Shi rushed into a house under the protection of a few bodyguards. At this time, he was in a very sorry state, his face full of fear. Just now, he had seen with his own eyes that 3 personal guards were hiding behind a thick wooden plank. However, when the gunshot rang out, a large hole was blasted in the wooden plank. The The 3 people who were hiding were also blasted 3 to 4 meters away. This kind of powerful lethality completely defeated his arrogance. At this time, he only had one feeling, and that was to quickly escape from here. Otherwise, he really didn't know where he would be safe at this time. Pong, 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 the sound of gunshots and explosions were endless, one after another. After the first explosion, there were always a few screams, which meant that more bodyguards were shot and died, or were seriously injured and lost the ability to fight. General, what do we do? A guard asked Cece with a pale face. His trembling legs represented his fear and nervousness at this moment. Think of a way to rush out, after all. He is only one person. Saishi was also frightened, but after all, he was a general, so he was able to quickly calm down. It was just that he was already very restrained, and no longer wanted to take Yang Qindong's life like before. The advanced firearms were already a headache, and this could be seen from the daily battle casualties that reached almost 10,000. Not to mention the cannons, the difference of one word meant that it was indeed an existence that could not be surpassed. Just in terms of momentum, the shotgun was already far superior to the 81 rifle and the 95 style. Let's split up and rush out. Saishi forced himself to calm down and tried to make his voice sound calm, then pointed at the 3 bodyguards beside him. You 3 run out in different directions, the others follow me. You have to remember, he is only one person, and it is impossible for him to shoot at all of you at the same time. The personal guards were used to obeying the general's orders, especially when they thought that there was only one enemy. If they fled in all directions, their chances of survival should be very high. A few personal guards looked at each other and nodded before rushing out of the house in different directions. Yang Qindong, who had already put away the shotgun, took out a Type 95.5, 8mm machine gun from the big warehouse. The gun's empty weight was 3.95 kilograms, 840mm long, 600 shooting range, and was fed by a 75-round drum. Compared to the shotgun that could only hold 6 rounds, this Type 95 machine gun's performance was a bit more powerful. The only difference was that it was not as powerful, but in front of the bodyguards were already scared out of their wits. It was nothing. Just as he reloaded a new magazine, he saw someone rushing out of the house. A cold light flashed in Yang Qindong's eyes. How could he be polite? He shot out a few shots, and the 3 guards who were fleeing in 3 different directions fell to the ground with a plop. Rush out! Saishi heard the sound of gunfire outside and knew that his chance was here. He yelled and brought the only 3 bodyguards with him out of the house. But right after he rushed out, he clearly saw the bodyguards' bodies on the street, including the 3 bodyguards who just rushed out. Saishi instinctively stopped and looked up at the roof. What he saw was Yang Qindong holding a Type 95 machine gun with a face full of killing intent. 222. After a few shots, the remaining 3 bodyguards fell backwards. If you looked closely, you would see that they were all shot in the forehead. For a machine gun to be able to hit the bullseye, it could be seen that Yang Qindong's familiarity and accuracy with guns had reached a new level. With a putong sound, Saishi also knelt on the ground. Different from the other bodyguards, his legs were shot. The powerful penetrating force of the machine gun shattered his leg bones, causing him to lose the ability to stand up. General! Shouts came from the houses on the side of the street. Some bodyguards rushed out as if they didn't care about their lives. Personal guards were indeed personal guards. Their loyalty to the general was many times higher than that of ordinary soldiers. But the reality was that their actions were completely useless. They could only become souls under the gun. 222, 222. The muzzle of the gun spat out a tongue of fire. Then, the bodyguards fell to the ground one by one. None of them could reach Saishi's side. Seeing everything that happened, Saishi forgot about the pain in his legs, because at this moment, his heart was in even more pain. The moment he mustered the courage to look up, he saw Yang Qindong standing on the roof like a devil. He made people feel a deep fear from the bottom of their hearts. The gunshots finally stopped, and the whole street instantly became quiet. None of the bodyguards were alive. The only ones who could breathe were Yang Qindong standing on the roof and Saishi, who was trembling on the ground with bleeding knees. Young master, Tiger's Mane and the others finally appeared. When they saw Yang Chendong on the roof safe and sound, they couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then they were deeply shocked. They were frightened by the scene in front of them. The street was full of corpses, and there were nearly 100 of them. This was all done by the sixth young master? Badao Jiang said as he couldn't help but gulp. 1 against 100. Although they had the advantage of advanced firearms, it wasn't something they could do. That should be the enemy general who caused trouble for us this time. Capture him and we'll have a public trial later. Right, bandage him up. We can't let him die so quickly. Jumping down from the roof, Yang Chendong walked to Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. At the same time that Saishi was captured in front of the commercial street because of the appearance of the guards and the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, the Lansong soldiers here were first defeated, then kneeled and surrendered in front of the powerful forces. The crisis of Hanoi City was resolved. At the entrance of the commercial street, Yang Chendong stood there and looked at the mess in front of him. On the commercial street after the war, some guns were completely smashed, and machine gun parts were scattered all over the ground. The bodies of the martyrs were in various positions. Some were hugging the enemy's waist, some were hugging the enemy's head, some were choking the enemy's neck, some were pressing the enemy to the ground, and some were burning together with the enemy. There was also a soldier who was still holding a grenade in his hand. His body was covered in brain matter. The brains of the Lansong soldiers who died with him were splattered all over the ground. Another soldier was holding half of the enemy's ear in his mouth. When they buried the bodies of the martyrs, because their hands were interlocked, they hugged the enemy so tightly that some of their fingers were broken. The cruel side of the war was finally revealed. In this battle, a platoon of the Cold Front soldiers had lost 6 people, and more than 10 were injured. Of the 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers, only 1 company was left standing. Of the 6 temporary auxiliary battalions, only 1 battalion survived. Of the 10,000 Vietnamese mercenaries led by Hong Jin, only less than 1,000 were left. This battle was the worst loss the mercenaries had suffered since they set out on the battlefield. Although this sacrifice had eliminated more than 40,000 enemies, this result still made Yang Chendong's heart ache. Standing behind him, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei and the others' eyes were red, and the murderous intent in their hearts had unknowingly gathered. Young master, this hatred must be avenged. Of course it must be avenged. Yang Chendong said with absolute certainty. Not only did the Lansong kingdom take in Fan Yuhai's defeated troops, they even dared to take the initiative to attack them. If he did not destroy them, how could he get rid of the hatred in his heart? Wouldn't that make others look down on him? 6th young master. Songzhe, Gao Yu, Lu Jian and Hong Jin finally appeared. From their bodies one could see heavy fatigue. It was obvious that the 3 days and 4 nights of fierce battle had consumed a lot of their energy. As soon as the 4 of them appeared, they had a guilty look on their faces. With such a heavy loss this time, they did not know what kind of punishment they would receive. Although they had worked hard in the process, the result was still unbearable. This was especially true for Hong Jin, who was one of the 4. This time, he was the one who allowed the enemy to break in while he was defending the city. What was even more hateful was that there were some traitors among his subordinates. It could be said that he was the most responsible for this incident in Hanoi City. He was originally a defeated general, and this time he committed such a big mistake. He really did not have the face to face Yang Chendong. The reason why he came this time was to ask for forgiveness. He was even mentally prepared to be punished severely and even to hand over his military power. Yang Chendong stood there motionless like a mountain. His eyes swept across the 4 people's bodies and faces, bringing great pressure to them. Hong Jin's mistake was already mentioned. Gao Yu's mistake was that he did not follow the rules and regulations. As a result, the telegraph was always on. When it was needed, there was not enough power to receive the telegraph. Naturally, it was a big mistake to not be able to receive the news. Although Lu Jian worked hard in the battle as the highest-ranking officer of Lengfeng, he only cared about the small area in front of him. He did not think about commanding the auxiliary troops, did not help this force, and did not even arrange for them to be on the watchtowers. Otherwise, the battle would not have been so difficult. As for Songzhi himself, he only focused on developing the economy. He did not think about how to deal with the enemy if they attacked. This was a little short-sighted. He did not even make good use of the 10,000 educated youths in the city. This was also a big mistake. The 4 people who had made mistakes at this moment, no one dared to look at Yang Chendong. They all lowered their heads, waiting for the result of their punishment. Sigh. With a sigh, Yang Chendong knew that they were wrong. However, this was not what they wanted to face. It was because of their limited vision. He believed that with this experience they should know how to deal with it in the future. You have worked hard. After sighing, Yang Chendong did not blame them. Instead, he encouraged them to say such a sentence. Chapter 571. They were waiting to be reprimanded, even prepared to be punished severely and transferred from their original posts. Who would have thought that Yang Chendong would say such a thing? What did he mean? Was he praising their efforts? The 4 of them raised their heads in confusion. Yang Chendong knew that there were some things that had to be explained clearly. Your performance in this battle was not bad. No matter what, you were able to persist until the last moment. Moreover, from the reaction at the beginning of the battle, it was very commendable to be fearless in battle and fearless in death. If I must point out your mistakes, it would be your inexperience and lack of preparation. You were too careless. You thought that, with the name of mercenaries, everyone in the world would be afraid of us and no one would find trouble with us. This is wrong. His tone was not very harsh. It was just the truth, but it was enough to make Songzhi and the others reflect. In this battle, unless Yang Chendong happened to be in Hanoi City, no one would have handled the matter better than Yang Chendong. Naturally, they could not blame anyone else. In ancient wars, when the city gate was opened, it was equivalent to the city falling. The fact that Hanoi City did not change hands was already very good. There was no reprimand or punishment as expected. Instead, it was Yang Chendong who reasoned with them and talked about his experience. It was only a 2-hour conversation, but it had benefited them greatly. They believed that if the same thing happened a second time, there would be a huge reversal. Perhaps they would not need any reinforcements to drive out the invading enemy. Songzhi and the others finally turned around to rest. First, they had been fighting continuously for the past few days. Whether it was physically or mentally, they were too tense. They needed a good rest to adjust their body's condition. Second, they also needed to digest some of the words of the 6th young master and then come up with a plan to deal with any unexpected events. The others went to rest, but Yang Chendong did not. Instead, he went to the palace and began to deal with the matters that had happened in the past few days. For hours after Hanoi City was recaptured, the information from all sides was sent over. Turned out that it wasn't just Hanoi. Shiyu City and a few other major cities in Jiaoji were also under attack. The only difference was that their opponent was the former Jiaoji's fugitive, Fan Yuhai. However, according to the reports, Fan Yuhai had yet to use his full strength. It seemed that he was waiting for the results of the battle in Hanoi City. This allowed Ruan Chuncheng, Qin Di, and the others to barely hold on to the city without suffering too many losses. Just a bunch of flies. Tell Commander Wu Shang to send out the 3 battalions under his command. Take the initiative to attack in companies. If you see any enemy that refuses to submit, kill them. Yang Chendong's face was cold as he gave the order. If it wasn't for the fact that Hanoi City needed someone to hold the fort and the main force was still rushing towards Hanoi City from the sea, Yang Chendong would have personally dealt with Fan Yuhai. He had a feeling that the reason why the Lansong Kingdom had the guts to take the initiative to attack Hanoi City was because of this person. Do you want to retake Jiaoji? Very well, let's see who's the real deal. Yang Chendong, who owned the warehouse, naturally had a domineering aura that looked down on the world. With the help of the 10,000 or so educated youths, Hanoi City was quickly restored to its original state. The corpses on the streets were carried away and the blood that flowed out was washed clean. On the surface, there didn't seem to be any difference. However, if one had to point out a change, it would be that there was an additional large Jingguan outside Hanoi City. The Jingguan was made up of the heads of over 40,000 people. Beside the Jingguan, there were a few tall wooden pillars with the corpses of Sai Shi and a few others hanging on them. Yang Qindong wanted to use this method to send a message to those who were plotting against him. This is the result of making an enemy out of me. 5 days later, the 2nd Regiment of Lung Feng, 20 auxiliary battalions, and 50,000 youths from the 2nd batch arrived at Hanoi City. They were warmly welcomed by Songzhe and the rest. Especially when Songzhe knew that these 50,000 youths were once part of the militia and had a certain level of military experience, he was extremely excited. He had already come up with a military plan to turn every citizen into a soldier and had received Yang Qindong's approval. Turning every citizen into a soldier meant that the citizens would still be citizens and would do whatever they were supposed to do. However, once the city was in danger, every citizen would be turned into a soldier. The youths who had received a certain level of military training would be the main force while the rest would be the support. They could take out weapons from the city's treasury and quickly arm them into combat personnel. Once they achieved merit in the war, they would receive generous rewards and so on. With Yang Qindong's approval, Songzhe even added another condition to the plan. That was, those who performed outstandingly in the war could be considered to join the Lung Feng. Just this condition alone was enough to move the hearts of countless educated youths. In Hanoi City, the most glorious thing to do was to join the Lung Feng. There was a saying that if one person joined the Lung Feng, his whole family would be honored. Let's put it this way. As long as one member of your family joined the Lung Feng, no matter where you went, you would be looked up to. No matter what you did, you would have more advantages and benefits than others. The reason why they became educated youths was not because they did not want to join the Lung Feng, but because the Lung Feng's assessment was only held twice a year and the number of recruits was limited. Since they could not get a spot, they thought of other ways to contribute to the development of Hanoi City. Now, there was a chance to join the Lung Feng. Unknowingly, these educated youths had a desire to join the Lung Feng. That way, they would have a chance to join the Lung Feng. 2 batches of educated youths would make up 100,000 people. Not only did they have a certain level of military training, but they were also very educated and very young. These people were undoubtedly highly sought after by Governor Song. However, after these people were divided into different cities under their leadership, they would definitely become a very powerful force. If used well, they would no longer have to fear other enemies. After handing over the matters of Yunnan province to Songzhe, Yang Qindong began to think about how to deal with the Lansong kingdom. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the deal was naturally different. This deal was to destroy the kingdom. Originally, he wanted to wait for the matters of Yunnan province to settle down before dealing with the Lansong kingdom. However, since the other party had made the first move, they could not blame him for making the first move. The Lung Feng's 3rd Regiment had already returned from the various cities. Just as Yang Qindong expected, the moment the Lung Feng appeared, Fan Yuhai immediately retreated with his men. Obviously, he knew that with his 50,000 men, it was impossible for him to win against the powerful mercenaries. With the return of the Lung Feng's 3rd Regiment, the matter of setting off for the Lansong Kingdom was also brought forward. In a mere 5 days, the preparations for the war against the Lansong Kingdom were completed. In order to take revenge for the destruction of Hanoi, this time, Yang Qindong mobilized the 2nd and 3rd Regiment of the Lung Feng's 20 battalions and the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries led by Hong Jin-ho, a total of 50,000 men. According to Yang Qindong's plan, once they took down the Lansong Kingdom, Chichen City would mobilize another 50,000 young men to complete the remaining tasks. Ships of military supplies were transported from Chichen City to Yunnan province and sent to the various troops. The 40,000 mercenaries marched out of Hanoi City's west gate and headed straight for the Lansong Kingdom. Their first destination was Heping County, which was next to Yinglu City in Yunnan province. Heping County was next to the Jiaoxi region and was one of the most important cities of the Lansong Kingdom. There was a 3,000-strong Lansong army here. When the mercenaries arrived at Yinglu City after 3 days, they did not stop and continued forward. The scouts of the Lansong Kingdom spread the news to the capital Wanxiang City. Wanxiang City, the city that represented the political and economic center of the Lan Song kingdom. Within the palace, King Piaci felt waves of pain in his teeth. He had believed Fan Yuhai's words and took the initiative to attack Jiaoxi City because he wanted to take advantage of the situation. He had heard that there were mountains of gold and silver there. As long as they won the war, they would obtain many advanced firearms that could make up for the shortcomings of the Lansong army. However, who would have thought that the main force of the mercenaries would suddenly appear? Not only did they resolve the crisis of Hanoi City, but they also defeated the 70,000 men including Sisi. Less than 10,000 men managed to escape the city. First, there was the defeat of Lottie's 100,000 men. Then there was the defeat of Sisi's 50,000 men. The Lansong kingdom's military strength was not very strong to begin with. Now, they only had 100,000 men led by Sang Wengla and 20,000 royal guards left in the palace. 120,000 men against 40,000, and in this battle it seemed like they had the advantage. However, if the enemy was the mercenaries, it would be a different story. Who didn't know that the mercenaries had the most advanced firearms in the world? Who didn't know that the mercenaries were used to winning when they were outnumbered? Where is Fan Yuhai? His face was burning with anger. Now, Piaci hated this general who had escaped from Jiaoxi. If he hadn't listened to his words, he wouldn't have to face the main force of the mercenaries so early. Your Majesty, General Fan's troops have already arrived at Sang New City. He sent someone to deliver a message, asking Your Majesty to lead the army to meet with him. He wants to defeat the mercenaries. Great General Saiwing stepped forward and saluted. A defeated mercenary? What a boastful claim. If Fan Yuhai really had such an ability, he wouldn't have had to run away like a stray dog. A mocking voice came from the crowd of officials. Then a middle-aged man with small eyes and a big head took the initiative to stand up. He cupped his fist and said respectfully to the high and mighty Piaci, Your Majesty, I think that Fan Yuhai wants to use us as a shield. He wants us to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Otherwise, why didn't Fan Yuhai make a move when Saishi had already attacked Hanoi City before? We have already suffered a loss. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Don't be fooled again. The person who spoke was the Lansong Kingdom's imperial preceptor, Long Qi. He was known for his eloquence and intelligence. He was later recruited by Piaci and given the position of imperial preceptor. Chapter 572. Could be said that if Sang Wengla was the representative of the military, then Long Qi was the representative of the civil officials. When such a person stood up to express his opinion, he quickly received the support of many civil officials below. Not only that, some people simply talked about the previous sneak attack on Hanoi City. They accused it of being a mistake and playing with fire. It would only put the Lansong kingdom in danger. Since ancient times, civil and military officials could not coexist. This was determined by their nature. Just like how military officials could only show their usefulness on the battlefield, civil officials needed the world to be peaceful. Only then could they display their talents. Once a war broke out, their abilities would be of little use. This was also why in history, whenever a war broke out, the civil officials would always advocate for peace while the military generals would always advocate for war. Piaci was still sitting on the high seat and watching everything with a smile. For an emperor, the balance of power represented their means. Civil and military opposing each other. This was what he wanted to see from the bottom of his heart. But when he saw the morale of the civil officials getting higher and higher, Sang Wengla and the other military officials slowly stopped talking and kept silent. He also saw that something was wrong. He hoped for the balance of power, but he definitely did not want to see either side getting bigger. Enough, enough. Seeing that the situation was completely one-sided, Piaci finally had to stand up and speak. With this shout, the hall quickly quieted down, showing that King Piaci's authority was still very strong. The matter of the alliance with Fan Yuhai was discussed before. How can we break the agreement? Besides, the mercenaries first attacked General Lottie and killed him. This time, they killed General Sisi. We are already irreconcilable with them. Let's not think about getting along peacefully. Sang Wengla, This king now orders you to lead the army north and meet with General Fan Yuhai in Sangnu City. We must keep the enemy army out of the country. This subject understands. Sang Wangla lowered his head and respectfully agreed. When he raised his head, he looked at Long Qi and the others with a somewhat provocative gaze. The meaning of showing off was very obvious. The court meeting ended with the king's words. If Sang Wangla began to deploy the army, he also sent people to supervise the army's food. This time, an army of 100,000 was going to war. Just eating and drinking every day was not a small expense. Imperial tutor, General Sang is here to rush us for food and clothing. As soon as he returned to his residence, Long Qi saw some relevant officials waiting for him in front of his residence. He was not in a good mood, so he waved his hand impatiently. Here, give me whatever you want. State Preceptor, there are very few military supplies left in the national treasury. Do we have to take them all out at once? A few officials asked with constipation on their faces. They couldn't be blamed for being in such a difficult situation. First, 100,000 soldiers were defeated, and then 50,000 soldiers were defeated. Along with them, there were also a lot of military supplies. After a few battles, the inventory in the national treasury was getting smaller and smaller. And this time, Sang Wangla was even more greedy. He wanted the weapons and clothes of 100,000 people. This was already their limit. If they really took out the weapons according to this request, the treasury would be empty. If there was a need, they would not be able to take out anything. At that time, once the king gave the order, what would they do? That was why he came to seek advice from the imperial tutor. Very few? Haven't you been forging weapons and military uniforms? Long Qi asked with a frown. As the state preceptor, there were too many things he needed to manage. It was impossible for him to be clear about everything. A few officials had a difficult expression as they replied. If it's imperial tutor, we have been working hard. However, the consumption is too great. Right now, many of the weapons have only been polished for the first time. They only look like they have taken shape, but there is still a long way to go before they are tough enough. Yes, imperial tutor. It's the same for military uniforms, shoes and hats. Only a part of them has been made. The rest are only half finished. We still need many embroiderers to work overtime for at least 2 months before they can be completed. The few subordinates were talking at once, which allowed Long Qi to have a better understanding of the situation. It was precisely because he understood enough that he raised his eyebrows slightly, and a strange look that no one knew flashed in his eyes. Then he quickly regained his calm. After muttering to himself for a moment, he said, "So that's the case. It's been hard on you. Speaking of which, it's all because those generals only know how to fight. They don't care about your feelings at all. Since that's the case and they are in a hurry, then just give them the half-finished products." Hearing Long Qi's reply, the few officials were stunned. They had an incomprehensible look on their faces. What? You don't want to? If you don't want to, then go and explain to them yourselves. This imperial tutor doesn't care anymore. Seeing that these people didn't seem to agree with his idea, Long Qi angrily turned around and was about to walk into the mansion. This frightened the officials. They quickly stopped Long Qi's footsteps and asked, "If we give them the half-finished products, then once they find out about it on the battlefield, what should we do? If they find out, then so be it. They are overestimating themselves. Besides, this time we are supposed to cooperate with Fan Yuhai in the battle. It's just a show of strength. Of course, if you have other ideas, then you can think of them." Long Qi said with an indifferent attitude. If there were other ideas, would they still ask for Long Qi's opinion? Thinking that there really wasn't a better idea, and that the soldiers were all like wolves and tigers. They looked like they would be beaten up at any time if they didn't give them the items. In the end, these officials made up their minds. After all, this idea came from Imperial Tutor Long Qi. If something happened, they wouldn't be alone. In the end, all of them expressed that they would listen to the order and left the Imperial Tutor's mansion. His ears finally quietened down. Long Qi strode towards the backyard of the mansion. All of you wait outside. This imperial tutor wants to be alone for a while. Waving his hand, he dismissed the guards beside him and entered the courtyard alone. After there was no one around him, Long Qi's footsteps became faster. After making several turns, he stopped in front of a small house. After taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and entered. The small house wasn't very big. Other than a bed, 2 chairs, and a small wooden table, there was nothing else. It looked very simple and crude. However, at this moment, there was a person sitting on a chair and fiddling with tea leaves in front of him. He seemed to be very focused and didn't seem to be displeased by the simple environment at all. Mr. Yun. Long Qi's attitude became more respectful. It was far from the high and mighty attitude he had towards the lower officials. Imperial tutor is here. Please take a seat. You came just in time. Try the tea leaves I just brewed. Mr. Yun smiled and pointed at the empty chair in front of him. Then let me try Mr. Yun's craftsmanship. Long Qi squeezed out a smile and sat down on the chair. The small house suddenly became much quieter. After the tea was brewed, Mr. Yun took the initiative to pour tea for both of them. Only then did Long Qi took the teacup and took a sip. Then he pretended to be very intoxicated and said, "It's really good tea." Naturally, no one cared about whether the tea was really good or not. What everyone wanted was just the atmosphere. Mr. Yun looked at Long Qi's performance and chuckled. He understood that the other party was using this matter to express his attitude. Since the other party said that his tea was good and his attitude was so respectful, needless to say, this person had already made his decision. With this thought, the smile on his face became even wider. Then, his right hand reached into his bosom and 1,000,000 taels of silver banknote appeared in his hand. Imperial tutor, this is from our Duke of Loyalty. With this banknote, anyone can exchange it for the same amount of silver taels at any Yang family bank. Hee hee. Long Qi unceremoniously reached out and took the banknote. The smile on his face was as bright as a blooming flower as he said, "Duke of Loyalty is really generous. Long Qi admires you." This banknote was worth 1,000,000 taels of silver. Just how big was the Lansong Kingdom? In a year, the National Treasury's income was only about 2,000,000 taels of silver. This banknote was half a year's income. Who wouldn't be envious of it? Carefully putting the banknote into his bosom, Long Qi did not wait for Mr. Yun to speak. "That's right. This is only the beginning." Duke of Loyalty said that as long as Imperial Tutor does well, he will give you a total of 5,000,000 taels of silver. This can be considered as a form of support for the Long family's business in the future. Hiss! When he heard the figure of 5,000,000 taels of silver, Long Qi, who was still smiling mischievously, could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. That was a huge amount of wealth. With this, even if the Long family did not do anything, just the interest alone would be enough to feed them for several generations. When the figure of 5,000,000 taels of silver was mentioned, the hesitation in Long Qi's heart completely disappeared. Of course, he was not worried that the Duke of Loyalty would not honor his promise. This was because he would become a role model. Whether it was good or bad, many people would see it. If the Duke of Loyalty really dared to play tricks with him, it would only cause more people's hearts to turn cold. It was said that the Duke of Loyalty was a person who did great things. He would not do things without propriety. Long Qi's thoughts were not wrong. Yang Chendong did not have the slightest intention of playing tricks with him. Since he had mentioned the figure of 5,000,000 taels of silver, he would definitely honor it. This was related to his image to the outside world. How could he do something that would destroy his own Great Wall? Then again, the reason why he had to pay such a huge price was because Long Qi himself was worth this price. 5,000,000 taels of silver was not a small amount in any country. However, when placed in the Crimson City that produced all kinds of novel goods, it was really not much. This was the advantage of having capital. As the saying goes, money can make the devil push the millstone. When the amount of silver reached a certain amount, it was not impossible for the millstone to push the devil. Furthermore, fighting a war was fighting for money. If one won a war, one could plunder more resources and good things. This seemed to have become a kind of cycle. It was just that, if some people played it well, it would form a virtuous cycle. If some people did not play it well, it would easily collapse. Chapter 573. Obviously, Yang Chundong was the kind of person who liked to play. With a large warehouse, countless goods, and all kinds of knowledge in his hands, this was enough to give him an advantage of a few hundred years. If he couldn't do this well, then he would have lived his life in vain. Of course, there were some things that couldn't be done immediately even if one had money. For example, the process of contacting and persuading Long Qi didn't go smoothly at first. The so-called Mr. Yun was Yun Ke, the leader of the Security Bureau's External Affairs Group 3. He was the one who had convinced Qin Di in Jiaoxi's Shiyu city to deal a heavy blow to King Li Li and his son, allowing the war to proceed more smoothly. After his contribution in Jiaoxi, he was sent to the Lansong Kingdom and began to tackle problems here. Perhaps because the mercenaries didn't arrive here, it took a lot of effort to establish a relationship with Long Qi. After spending a lot of money, he finally met Long Qi. Long Qi still didn't trust him, or rather, he still had some illusions about the Lansong Kingdom. No matter what, Long Qi was still the state preceptor of the Lansong Kingdom. He was considered the role model and leader of the civil officials. For someone with such a high position and authority, it was extremely difficult for him to betray the Lansong Kingdom. Fortunately, Skylark was indeed capable. In order to meet Long Qi, he spent 1,000,000 taels of silver. Sure enough, for the sake of money, the two finally met in private. Needless to say, with Skylark's ability, it didn't take long for Long Qi to be moved, especially after he was promised that the Yang family's goods in the Lansong Kingdom would be given to the Long family to handle. Long Qi really couldn't refuse. But even so, Long Qi didn't agree immediately. Instead, he said that he needed to think about it. In fact, he wanted to investigate properly. Sure enough, after they met and parted ways, many people from the state preceptor's residence left the Lansong Kingdom and rushed to Jiaoxi and Great Ming as merchants. It was also because the investigation needed time, and before the final decision was made, Long Qi couldn't say anything. This caused Yunk to not receive accurate information in advance when the battle in Hanoi City broke out, causing the mercenaries to suffer some losses. Although the sixth young master did not blame Skylark for this matter, he still blamed himself, thinking that his intelligence work was not good enough. In order to make up for this mistake, he suddenly appeared in the Imperial Advisor's residence and stayed there as a guest. This was definitely a risky move. Long Qi didn't reject Skylark's sudden appearance. Instead, he got someone to arrange a house for him in the backyard. The state preceptor's plan was also very good. If the people who came back with good news, he naturally wouldn't mind having a good talk with Skylark. On the other hand, he could also capture this person and send him to the king to show his loyalty. The path of advancement and retreat were both beneficial to him, so he allowed Skylark to move in. In the span of 2 months, the people that were sent out returned one after another. The news that they brought back completely shocked State Preceptor Long Qi. Doing business was an act of earning money. Long Qi was naturally clear about this. However, he didn't have a direct understanding of how profitable it was. Perhaps this was because the Lansong Kingdom was too small, which limited his vision. However, the people that were sent out reported that as long as a merchant was able to do business with the mercenaries, they could be described as earning a lot of money. They used the Chang clan of the Southern Ming dynasty as an example. They were originally a business aristocratic family. Later on, because of their relationship with the mercenaries, they heard that the future head of the Chang clan was a student of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. With this, they could obtain more novel goods and sell them to other merchants. With the cooperation of the Yang clan's bank, the people from the state preceptor's residence were lucky enough to see some of the account books. The figures obtained from them shocked Long Qi even more. Just the Chang clan alone could earn up to 500,000 taels of silver a month from doing business. This was also because they were in the Southern Ming dynasty, where the business competition was very fierce. If they could make a net profit of 500,000 taels of silver a month, wouldn't that be 6 million taels of silver a year? If the Long clan could also get a share of the profits, the Lansong Kingdom spending power couldn't be considered small and there wasn't that much competition. Wouldn't they be able to make a few million taels of silver a year? With the figures in front of him, Long Qi had no choice but to take action. The scales in his heart finally tilted. Under the temptation of huge profits, he finally made the final decision to agree to Yang's request for cooperation and betray the Lansong Kingdom's interests. Not to mention whether the Lansong Kingdom could withstand the attacks of the mercenaries. Even if it could, the foundation of the kingdom would be shaken. Even if he was the state preceptor, how much could he gain from this? Not to mention that his position as the state preceptor wasn't permanent. It was already lonely at the top and there were many people secretly coveting this position. If he did something wrong, it was very likely that he would be consigned to eternal damnation. Then if the mercenaries won the war, where would he go? No matter how he looked at it, it was better to cooperate with the mercenaries. After all, the benefits were there and he wouldn't lose it. As long as he had money, he could enjoy life. As for what would happen to the Lansong Kingdom, it had nothing to do with him. He was just a subject, wasn't he? With a decision in his heart, Long Qi finally came to the backyard to meet the guest elder who had been in his residence for 2 months. When he came, Yunk guessed that the other party had made up his mind and took out 1,000,000 taels of silver note, leaving the other party with no way out. Under the temptation of so much money, Long Qi indeed had no way out. Under the influence of greed, it was possible to do anything, not to mention the 3,000,000 taels of silver that would be given after the matter was completed. Long Qi was actually thinking about it. It was possible to do business, but one had to have the capital to do so. Even though he had been the state preceptor for a few years, in reality, there were too many people that he needed to feed. In terms of money, he had only accumulated a few 100,000 taels, and this was under the situation where he held great power. Now that he even had the capital to do business, he naturally wouldn't have any scruples. He told Yunk everything that happened in today's court meeting, as well as the few subordinates in charge of the war logistics looking for him. Very good. Yunk was very satisfied with Long Qi's attitude. Since the state preceptor has already expressed his stance, then we are all on the same side. The victory of the mercenaries is also our victory. For this kind of victory, I think we can have some ideas on the soldiers of the Lansong Kingdom. As long as we can control their logistics, it will be a great achievement. And if we really do make a contribution in this matter, I can consider suggesting to the Duke of Loyalty to give the state preceptor more money as a reward. Hearing that there was a great reward, Long Qi's eyes almost narrowed into slits. In order to express his gratitude, he revealed another piece of information. Mr. Yun, my people have discovered that many of the Han people stationed in the Lansong Kingdom are being gathered. As for what they are doing, I am not too sure. Oh, there is such a thing? After hearing this, Yunk's expression became much more serious. Although he didn't understand the reason behind this, it wouldn't happen for no reason. It seemed that there was a need to report this matter to the 6th young master. 40,000 mercenaries took down Heping town in a single attack. The town walls weren't high to begin with. The enemy only had 3,000 people and 10,000 civilians. It was impossible to stop the mercenaries from advancing. After taking over the town, Yang Chundong entered the barracks of the Lansong soldiers. Lung Feng's second commander Luo Po, political commissar Kong Jie, third commander Wu Shang, and political commissar Chun Bo all came to the 6th young master. 6th young master, in this battle we have captured around 1,800 Lansong soldiers. How should we deal with them? Should we send them back to Vietnam with the civilians and send them back to Ryukyu Island by sea? The political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jie, asked. Things like this after a battle were usually handled by political cadres like them. Send the civilians back. There is no need for the soldiers. Kill them all. Yang Chindong was still looking at the sand table that Tiger's Mane had just made. He didn't even raise his head as he spoke. Kill them all? Kong Jie thought he heard wrong and asked again. Yes, kill them all. The martyrs of Hanoi City need an explanation from us. Since the Lansong nation dared to find trouble with us, they should be prepared for our revenge. Yang Chendong raised his head as he spoke. Then, his gaze swept across Luopa and the other three. What? Do you have any questions? Being stared at by Yang Chendong, the four of them instantly felt pressured. However, the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jie, and the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment, Chun Bo, gritted their teeth and spoke out together. 6th Young Master, killing prisoners is not a good thing. Chun Bo was originally a military officer. Even now, he was still the battalion commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment. However, since he was also the political commissar of the regiment, he had to carry out his authority. He stood up and spoke out together with Kong Jie. Yang Chendong raised his eyebrows. He seemed a little displeased. Of course, killing prisoners is not good. However, it is also a means of war. As long as it can intimidate the enemy, this young master thinks that the death of these 1,800 people is worth it. All right, it's settled. Go and carry it out. He casually waved his hand and concluded the matter. He did not give anyone else the right to speak. Yang Chendong was already giving them face by explaining to the two political commissars. If they still had any objections, then he wouldn't mind replacing them. It was a good thing for officers to have their own opinions. However, it depended on what kind of situation they were in. This was a war that could destroy a nation. If they had even the slightest bit of mercy, it would prove that they were not suitable for this kind of war. There was no other way. Although Kong Jie and Chun Bo's faces were still a little gloomy, they still knew how to behave and left the room. Obviously, Yang Chendong's power was so great that his words carried enormous weight. Chapter 574. Since it was an order from the 6th Young Master, they had to carry it out. This was also the first lesson they learned after becoming the Cold Vanguard, which was to obey orders. The officers retreated. Yang Chendong, who was still looking at the sand table, punched the name of Wood Province. Order: the entire army will rest for a day, then attack Wood Province. Yang Chendong's words carried a hint of killing intent. The tragic scene in Hanoi City's commercial street had provoked him. His dream was to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world. He had just taken a step forward, but he had already suffered such a blow. This made him feel very guilty, and he also planned to vent his anger on Lansong Nation. Peace Town had been broken, and the mercenaries were charging towards Wood Province. After the frontline battle report returned, Fan Yuhai had already sent people to Lansong Land's capital, Wanxiang City, to urge for reinforcements. He even said that if reinforcements did not appear, he would retreat. He had originally come to help Lansong Nation, but now that the main character had not appeared, what was the meaning of him, the helper, staying here? Fan Yuhai's heart desired to defeat the mercenaries. In order to achieve this goal, he had made a lot of preparations this time. However, this did not stop him from scaring Lansong Nation. After all, the mercenaries were now in Lansong Nation's territory. By the time Fan Yuhai's men arrived at Wanxiang City, Sang Wangla had already led 100,000 soldiers out of the city. Since the king had already given the order, he naturally did not dare to delay. However, the required rations had not been gathered, and he could not possibly let the soldiers go to the battlefield on an empty stomach. Wasn't this? He had just finished preparing the military supplies when he led the army out. However, he did not know how terrible the rations that he had spent so much effort to obtain were. The rice was old, and it was the kind that had already started to rot and mold. The weapons were semi-finished products. They only looked in good shape, but when they were actually used, one would know how weak they were. Even the quality of the uniforms they wore was extremely poor. Some of them had already been unstitched before they even reached Sangwon City, causing countless soldiers to curse them. All of this was naturally the work of State Preceptor Long Chi. He had already accepted Skylark's 2 million taels of silver. After making the decision to rely on the Duke of Loyalty, he no longer feared anyone. Moreover, in his eyes, since these 100,000 soldiers had left, there was no need for them to think about coming back. What was there to be afraid of? Half a month later, in front of Sangnu City, the armies of both sides set up their battle formations, looking like they were going to fight it out. The attacking party consisted of more than 40,000 mercenaries. They left Hanoi, passed through Ing Brothel, took over Heping Town, and took over Muzhou City. They came all the way to Sang New City. From afar, the defending side seemed to have the advantage in numbers. Sang Wangla led 100,000 troops, and with Fan Yuhai's 50,000, they had a total of 150,000 men. This did not include the 100,000 workers and 30,000 Han civilians that they had recruited from the nearby cities. The Lancang Kingdom once had an alias called the Laos Comfort Department. It was originally a province of the Great Ming Dynasty. However, because the Great Ming Dynasty had lost its rule over Jiaoxi, and the originally powerful Great Ming Dynasty had split into two after the Tumu Rebellion, Jiaoxi was naturally no longer under the Great Ming Dynasty's control. However, there were still some Han civilians within the Great Ming Dynasty. It was as if these 30,000 people were forcibly recruited from the nearby cities. Now, half of these Han civilians were pushed to the front of the battlefield. The remaining half were mixed in with the Lancang soldiers and Fan Yuhai's men. This was to prevent the mercenaries from firing cannons. Fan Yuhai had already experienced how advanced their cannons were during the Battle of Hanoi City. With that experience, he was fully prepared this time. The 30,000 Han civilians mixed in with the army were prepared to deal with the cannons. There were also 100,000 Lancang civilians. They had set up hundreds of catapults. In comparison, these catapults were very simple. Some were even built with rough wood, and the joints were connected with thick ropes. They could not be used for long, but when there were many of them, they were still quite powerful. This was the second method that Fan Yuhai had prepared. Since it was the second method, there should be a third. That's right, the third method was the 5,000 light cavalry. This was all that Fan Yuhai had. He had even taken out the 1,000,000 taels of silver that Bai Ming had given him. Only then could he have such a cavalry force that could charge and retreat quickly. Before the Ming Dynasty, the Mongols relied on their invincible war horses to kill their way into the Central Plains and establish the Yuan Dynasty. From this, one could see how strong cavalry was. Other than these three methods, Fan Yuhai had another trump card, which was Li Min and Shin Kuan. They were all experts in close combat and possessed decent martial arts. As long as they found the right opportunity, they would be able to sever the head of the Duke of Loyalty amidst the chaos. If they succeeded, the mercenaries would be defeated without a leader. At that time, he would lead his army and fight his way through, restoring the glory of Jiaoxi and reliving the glory of the past. For this battle, Fan Yuhai had put in a lot of effort and made ample preparations. Right now, he was riding on a horse and mixed in with the cavalry. As he looked at the mercenaries in the distance who had also set up their battle formation, a trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his eyes. He wanted to see how the Great Ming's loyal duke, who was rumored to care for the Han people, would break out of this situation. On the side of the mercenaries, when they saw many civilians in Han attire being pushed to the front of the troops by the enemy, some of the officers immediately felt a sense of helplessness. Those who were able to become mercenaries had all stayed in Qiqian City before. Naturally, they knew about the sixth young master's dream of reviving the Han people. This dream was not just for show. In the Battle of Jiaoxi, the number of Han people saved had reached 80,000, and this number was still increasing as more cities surrendered. It could be said that the reason why the Cold Vanguard could be so united was because of the rising status of the Han people. Most of them were people who had suffered before, so they didn't want to see their children suffer again. Now that they had the chance to conquer a country for them and live a better life, how could they not give it their all? However, with so many of their compatriots standing in front of them and blocking their way, they felt like they had punched cotton, and it was very depressing. Through the binoculars, Yang Chundong saw the enemy's formation clearly, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. Forcing the people to fight was clearly a despicable act, and it was shameful for a real man. If such a thing happened in the future, it would definitely be opposed and reprimanded by all the countries in the world. However, it was only the 14th century now, and the slogan of human rights had not been used before. Even Yang Chundong himself did not know how many people he had built, so it would be ridiculous to talk about human rights at this time. It could be said that the war at this time was all about cruelty and unscrupulous means. Fan Yuhai's actions made some people curse him for not being a hero and not doing things in an open and aboveboard manner. There was really nothing else to say about it. "Young master!" Tiger's Mane stood at the side and shouted, not knowing what to do. The two commanders of the Cold Vanguard and the political commissar came to Yang Qindong's temporary command center. The situation at the front line was complicated, and it made them feel powerless. Of course, not all of them cared about the lives of the people. For example, the third commander, Wuxia, wanted to say that they should just kill. With the advanced cannons and continuous fire guns they had prepared, they only needed a fierce charge to suppress the enemy's morale, and there was hope for victory. Of course, this was only a thought in his mind, and Wuxia did not dare to say it out loud. He did not know what the sixth young master meant, and he dared to make such a statement. If he made him unhappy, his position as commander would be over. The four commanders were waiting for Yang Qindong's instructions. The command center was extremely quiet, until Beta Persei shouted, "Not good. The enemy is moving, and they are slowly walking towards us." "What?" Luo Pe and the others exclaimed, and each of them looked at the battlefield through the binoculars on their chests. Yang Qindong also took the binoculars from Beta Persei and saw the enemy encircling the Han civilians and approaching the center of the battlefield step by step. The look in his eyes became even more gloomy, and the command center was so silent that you could hear a pin drop. After a long time, he finally spat out a word with difficulty, "Retreat!" "What?" Wu Shang's reaction was the most intense, as if he could not believe his ears. How could such a military order be given? "I said retreat, everyone retreat." Yang Qindong was like an angry lion, and he roared at Wu Shang. This time, everyone heard it clearly, and their bodies tensed up, and they immediately carried out their mission. Yang Qindong was left alone in his chair. He knew that these Han civilians were not real Han civilians, and they had lived in the Lansong Kingdom for many years, and they had already gotten married or had children there. In their hearts, they had probably long forgotten about the great Ming dynasty. If these people died, then they died, and it was not considered a loss. However, in front of so many people, Yang Qindong had no choice but to give such a military order. This was because he wanted to establish a side in the army that loved his people like his own children. He wanted everyone to know that his goal of leading all Han people to the top of the world had not changed. "Young master!" Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei walked to Yang Qindong's left and right. The two of them did not know what to say at this moment, and only thought that they should accompany the young master at this time. "I'm fine, you guys pack up and retreat." Yang Qindong seemed to be very weak as he waved his hand. However, in reality, the look in his eyes was extremely firm. He had already thought of a plan to deal with this situation, and what he did just now was more of an act. In fact, as early as a few days ago, Yang's information was sent over. Among them was the news that the nearby Han civilians were suddenly recruited. The moment he saw this news, Yang Qindong guessed in his mind what Fan Yuhai was going to do. Chapter 575. Using civilians as hostages. Perhaps the ancient people did not experience this many times. However, during the anti-Japanese era, this kind of thing happened countless times. However, this seemingly old-fashioned method was the most effective against those benevolent and righteous people. On this issue, their seniors had suffered many losses. When they were studying in the military academy, the instructors had also brought up this problem. It was a pity that even in the future, when technology was more advanced, no one could think of a good way to solve this problem. Fortunately, the students back then knew the nobility of human rights. No matter who it was, if they wanted to use this method again, they would first have to endure great pressure. They did not think that they would encounter such a situation again. At that time, Yang Qindong had also thought of this problem, but it was just a thought. After that, he threw it to the back of his mind. After all, he also did not think that such a thing would happen to him. He was the most powerful Cold Vanguard, the king of soldiers. He was used to carry out dangerous missions and not in this kind of conventional battle. The most hateful thing was that he actually had to face this problem now. For the past few days, Yang Chundong had been thinking about it. Until last night, when he looked at the moon hanging high in the sky and the bright moonlight shone down on the earth, he finally made a decision. Although it was not the best method, at least it was passable and no one would criticize him. Yang Chundong gave the order to retreat. The 40,000-strong army retreated for tens of li. When the sky was about to turn dark, Fan Yuhai's army finally stopped advancing. Then, everyone's face was filled with joy as they laughed heartily. They thought that they had finally found the soft rope of the mercenaries. If they had known that this method would be so effective, they would not have lost Jiaoji. Following the laughter, the 30,000 Han people were speechless and angry. Originally, they did not know what they were going to do here. However, after everything that happened today, they finally saw the truth. It turned out that they were going to be used as human shields. The anger in their hearts was as fierce as a tiger. No, could only be said that they were like cats. In front of Fan Yuhai and the Lansong Kingdom's army, who were many times more numerous than them, they did not dare to resist. All these years of living here had smoothed out the edges and corners of their struggles, making them accustomed to being oppressed and resigned to their fate. Of course, they were more worried that the Han army would suddenly launch an attack on them. If that was the case, the 10,000 Han soldiers at the front would undoubtedly be the first to be killed. Just like that, they were on tenterhooks for an entire day. Only when the sky had completely darkened did the Han citizens let out a sigh of relief. Although they did not know what would happen the next day, no matter what, they had managed to get through today's ordeal. Ha! As expected, these Han people are mercenaries. In the central tent, Sang Wang Le's face was full of excitement. He sat on the big chair and drank wine. He felt incomparably carefree. Fan Yuhai was also very happy. Obviously, the feeling of having everything under control made him very comfortable. However, he was still a famous general, so he wouldn't easily show his arrogant side. Wasn't the mercenary army still there? To become a famous general, there were several requirements. For example, accurate judgment, fearless courage, the ability to control the entire situation, as well as a humble and cautious mentality. Fan Yuhai was undoubtedly qualified, but his years of cautiousness still made him say to Sang Wangla, "General Sang, it's too early to be happy. The mercenaries are only retreating. They have not been defeated by us. Looking at these mercenaries, their military discipline is indeed strict. Even when they were retreating, they were still in an orderly manner. They will not be easy to deal with. As for the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries, their morale is already starting to weaken. Why don't we attack them when we advance tomorrow? As long as these 30,000 people are defeated, it will definitely affect the main force of the mercenaries. At that time, our opportunity will be presented." Everything that happened today had already proven Fan Yuhai's ability. Sang Wangla naturally believed in his words. He nodded. "Okay, tomorrow morning, we will plan properly. It's about time we take the initiative to attack." Previously, they did not attack because they were not sure if the Han citizens would be effective against the mercenaries. After all, this was an opponent that killed without batting an eyelid. Just the number of Jingguan statues that they had created was unknown. But now that they had found their weakness, how could they not take advantage of it? Good. Tomorrow we will definitely defeat the mercenaries. Haha, let's drink. Fan Yuhai was in a good mood as he raised his wine glass high towards his ally. Cheers! Sang Wangla laughed loudly, showing the arrogant side of him when it came to drinking. The cold front had a strict discipline. During wartime, regardless of the reason, no one was allowed to drink. Because of this, they had even punished a few low-ranking officers. Those who were able to enter the cold front were all outstanding individuals. To become an officer, one had to put in a lot of effort and go through a lot of trials. Their family was extremely proud of having an officer in the cold front. But it was precisely because of drinking that they were taken away that they were wrongly accused. With such an example, even those who loved to drink could only suppress their desire for good food. There was no other choice. The treatment of the cold front was too good, and the halo that it gave off was too strong. No one was willing to voluntarily withdraw from such a team. At this moment, not only was no one in the cold front drinking, they were all sitting quietly. A strong sense of pressure was building up above their heads. For the first time, the incident during the day made them feel helpless. Facing their own compatriots, some of them even felt hatred in their hearts. Perhaps it was because their daily political work was too good, but the word surrender did not exist in the dictionary of the cold front soldiers. Even if they were the only ones left on the battlefield, they would still fight fiercely to show their existence. After all, if they became martyrs, their families would be respected and treated well. If they became captives, their families would not be able to raise their heads with them for the rest of their lives. Under this kind of ideological education, they looked down on those who were spineless, even if they were Han citizens. Just like the 10,000 Han citizens who walked in front of the enemy during the day. Although they were forced to do so and had their own difficulties, it was not a reason for them to help the enemy do evil. Could it be that if the mercenaries and the cold front were defeated, these Han citizens would be considered meritorious? Would they be able to live a good life? The answer was obviously not like that. If the mercenaries were defeated, these Han citizens would no longer have any value. Although they would not be killed immediately, they would not be able to live a good life. Furthermore, because the mercenaries had injured many of the Lansong Kingdom's soldiers, they would only vent their anger on these Han citizens. In other words, from the moment the mercenaries appeared on the land of the Lansong Kingdom, these Han people only had two choices. One was to live in grievance, the other was to bravely stand up and resist. Perhaps they would die, but perhaps they would be able to completely change the trajectory of their lives. This principle could be seen by all the cold front soldiers, but these Han citizens did not seem to be able to see it. Perhaps it was because they were uneducated and did not know how to think, or perhaps they did not know what resistance was. They did not know how to rely on their own efforts to earn the respect of others, to obtain their own dignity. Or perhaps they did not even want to consider and face this problem. If that was the case, what was the difference between these people being alive and dead? For the sake of these people, they had no choice but to retreat. Who would feel good about it? If not for the strict discipline of the cold front soldiers, where obeying orders was the first thing they learned after joining the army, they would not have retreated step by step and revealed a trace of helplessness. However, the orders came from the 6th young master, so naturally, they could only obey. The cold front soldiers and the 20 auxiliary battalions ate dinner in such an atmosphere. After that, no one said a word, silently hugging their rifles and returning to their own barracks. The sky was already dark, but not a single soldier said that they were going to sleep. Under the suffocating state of mind, they probably would not be able to sleep even if they were asked to. Who knew if they would have nightmares when they finally fell asleep? No, we can't allow others to bully us like this. We must resist. Among the auxiliary soldiers, a company commander called Wang Yong suddenly broke the silence and stood up. Wang Yong's personality was straightforward. In order to avenge his family, he did not hesitate to enter the cold front soldiers' barracks under the guise of herding pigs and caused a huge ruckus. Fortunately, he was lucky enough to meet the 6th young master, Yang Chendong. After that, not only did he kill his enemy, Chang Yuan, from the Huang bandit army, he was also assigned as a temporary auxiliary soldier. After experiencing more than a dozen battles, Wang Yong finally matured. Not only did he become an auxiliary soldier, but he also became a company commander of the auxiliary soldiers. With his personality, it was normal for him to suddenly stand up and express his unfairness at this time. Originally, everyone was very depressed. All they lacked was a fuse to ignite their emotions. Wang Yong's sudden appearance gave everyone an outlet to vent their emotions. Very quickly, he received the support of many officers. Everyone was holding a breath in their hearts, but they did not know what to do. Since someone said that it was unfair and wanted to ask the 6th young master for help, many officers stood up. At first, it was only Wang Yong's battalion. Soon, this atmosphere spread to the other battalions, and they received even more support. In the end, even the cold front soldiers joined in. Commander Wu Shang became the leader of the crowd. He brought more than 50 officers of platoon rank and above to the temporary command center. "What are you all doing?" Looking at the sudden appearance of so many officers in such a menacing manner, the first and second guards in charge of the arrangements became 100 times more alert. Some of the guards even unlocked the safety of their guns, as if they were ready to fire at any moment. Chapter 576. The captain of the first guard team, Qiu Vi, and the captain of the second guard team, Dao Xiao, were also holding their guns. Their eyes were filled with anger, especially when they looked at Wu Shang, the leader of these officers. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent. Obviously, they thought that this was a mutiny and that Wu Shang was the leader. Wu Shang's face turned bitter when he noticed the two guard captains' murderous gazes. He would not dare to harm the sixth young master even if he had 100 guts. He was here to ask for a battle. In order to avoid any misunderstandings, he and the other officers did not bring any weapons. "Captains, you've misunderstood. We're here to request a battle. We're not here to harm the sixth young master. We don't have the guts to do that." In order to clear up the misunderstanding, Wu Shang nervously explained. Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao did not listen to Wu Shang's explanation. They only knew that these people had come to the sixth young master's tent without orders and had threatened the safety of the tent. They had to deal with these people according to their duties. "Men, tie these people up." Once the two captains gave the order, 60 guards ran out from all corners and pounced on the 50-plus officers like ferocious tigers. These guards did not care what they were here for. Since their captains had given the order, they did not hold back. They used all their strength and pressed the officers who had come to ask for a battle to the ground. However, the officers didn't dare to resist. If they did, it would be no different from a rebellion. But the problem was who dared to rebel against Yang Chendong. Soon, the 50 officers were restrained. Their hands were tied behind their backs and pressed to the ground. Some of the officers had to pay a price for this. For example, their mouths came into close contact with the ground and they were already eating dirt. Wu Shang was also held down. Perhaps because he was the captain and a fierce general, the number of people holding him down increased from 1 to 2. With the 8 captains, Zhang Yupeng, controlling him, he could not resist at all. "We can't accept what you're doing. We want to see the sixth young master." Although he was restrained, his mouth wasn't sealed. Wu Shang was still shouting and yelling. He was now the leader of Cold Front, and he was definitely one of the higher-ups of Cold Front. But now, he was actually being pressed to the ground and eating dirt. How could he be willing? Hearing Wu Shang's shout, the other officers also shouted, looking like they would rather be beaten to death. "Seal their mouths," Chou Wu said with a black face when he saw that he couldn't calm them down. He looked like he was about to sew Wu Shang's and the others' mouths with a needle. Once the order was given, some members immediately went to find towels and other things to stuff their mouths with. This caused the officers to struggle even more. If they were really gagged, then wouldn't they really become rebellious officers who couldn't speak reason? What? Seeing that the situation was about to change if the officers resisted, the guards were about to be ruthless. Just as they were about to get injured, a voice shouted. Tiger's Mane, a senior colonel, appeared. There were only 3 senior colonels in the entire Yangxia army. They were the Army's division commander, Leng Song, and the Navy's division commander, Gao Xiong. The last one was Tiger's Mane. This also showed his lofty status and identity. As soon as Tiger's Mane appeared, 2 guard captains immediately walked up and said, "Tiger's Mane, these officers came without orders. There are so many of them. We were afraid that there would be problems, so we took the initiative. No, we didn't even bring a single weapon. How could we have other thoughts? We just want to see the 6th young master. We want to fight." Wu Shang, who was pinned down, forced his head up and looked at Tiger's Mane. At the same time, he looked at Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu with a warning gaze. It was as if he was saying, "Brats, I'll remember you. Just wait and see how I'll deal with you later." Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu naturally didn't care about the threat in Wu Shang's eyes. They were the 6th young master's guards. They already had a high status. Even if Leng Song and Gao Xiong were here, they didn't have the right to order them around. Enough! Tiger's mane saw everything. His body shook and he shouted angrily, "We're all brothers. Why are you using weapons? Let them go." Let them go? Tiger's mane, there are more than 50 of them. Once, the second guard captain, Dao Xiao, said unwillingly. Once what? Or do you have no confidence in yourselves? Even 60 people with guns can't deal with 50 people? Listen to my order. Let them go. The sixth young master wants to see them. Tiger's mane's eyes flashed coldly as he looked at Dao Xiao. Once he heard that it was the sixth young master's order, Dao Xiao immediately became obedient. After he agreed, he gave the order to let them go. Wu Shang and the rest of the 50 guards were freed. Wu Shang stood up. He first shook off the dirt on his body. Then, he saluted Tiger's mane and said, "Thank you for your help, Tiger's mane. There's no need to thank me. This is the sixth young master's idea. But I also want to remind you that when you see the sixth young master, you only need to express your opinion and attitude. Don't make a fuss. Otherwise, before anyone else can deal with you, I'll make the first move." Tiger's mane's words were not just for show. Everyone knew that he had been serving the sixth young master for many years and was regarded as the most trusted person. If they offended him, Wu Shang and the rest would not be able to withstand his suppression. It wouldn't even be long before their military officer halos would be removed. Knowing that he could not go against Tiger's mane, Wu Shang nodded repeatedly. "Don't worry, Tiger's mane. We know what we're doing." Although he said that, whether he knew what he was doing or not was quickly seen. When Wu Shang and the rest of the 50 guards entered the command center, they became enraged again. One by one, they asked to fight. Some even said that if they couldn't fight, they might as well be demoted. This was because they couldn't lead the soldiers under them. It would be better to be an ordinary soldier. The shouting continued for a while. Tiger's mane scolded them several times, but there was no effect at all. The guards all talked at once and had no intention of stopping. Yang Chendong sat in his chair and watched Wu Shang and the others' performance very calmly. He did not speak at all. It wasn't until the time it took for a stick of incense to burn past and the guards were all talking that he coughed softly. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, immediately understood and shouted, "Shut up, all of you. The young master has something to say." A voice like a lion's roar resounded throughout the command center, causing everyone's eardrums to tremble. At this time, they finally understood why the sixth young master always told Beta Persei to speak softly. If he didn't suppress it, no one's ears would be able to withstand such a loud voice ringing in their ears every day. But the effect of this roar was also good. At least everyone's mouths were half closed and no one said anything more. The command center quieted down. Yang Chendong's gaze slowly swept across everyone one by one. Anyone who was stared at by his gaze would involuntarily lower their head, like a child who had made a mistake. "You want to ask for battle?" Yang Chendong finally asked the first question after an unknown amount of time. "Yes, sixth young master, we want to ask for battle." Wu Shang's official position was the highest here, so naturally, he was the one who answered Yang Chendong's question. Yang Chendong wasn't surprised or angry that Wu Shang stood up for him. Instead, he asked, "Then do you know that the enemy has placed our compatriots in the front line? If we attack, we might hurt them." Wu Shang nodded. "We know." Wu Shang answered happily. Obviously, he had already thought about the situation and problems he would face before he came. Thus, not only did he answer without hesitation, he also said the following words very smoothly. "But we also know that if we blindly retreat, it will not only harm our compatriots in front of us, but even our Han compatriots behind us will also be implicated. We can't lose the big picture for the small. Besides, what are you talking about?" Yang Chendong asked with interest when he saw Wu Shang's hesitant look. "Besides," as if he had gathered his courage, Wu Shang said with a resolute expression. "Besides, they are now being threatened by the enemy and have no intention of resisting. Then they are not our compatriots, but the enemy's accomplices. Facing such people, we can't be soft-hearted. Nonsense. Yang Qindong's originally amiable face suddenly turned cold, stopping Wu Shang from saying what he wanted to say next. Sixth young master. Wu Shang wanted to continue speaking, but Tiger's Mane, who knew Yang Qindong very well, shouted loudly, "Listen to the young master. If you dare to speak nonsense again, I will lock you up." Putting aside the unpleasant feeling of being locked up, just the fact that they were facing a powerful enemy. If they were locked up, wouldn't they miss out on the big battle? Without a battle to fight, that was Wu Shang's weakness. He quickly shut his mouth and did not dare to continue speaking. Wu Shang didn't say anything, but Yang Qindong continued. Just because they were threatened by the enemy doesn't mean that we don't recognize them as our compatriots. In fact, they've suffered a lot over the years, they suffered a lot. The reason why we attacked the Lansong nation was not only to take revenge for provoking us, but also to save more Han people so that they can live a better life like our family. Don't you think so? Yes, yes, the sixth young master is merciful. For the sake of the Han people, heaven and earth can be our witness. The group of officers said in unison. They weren't trying to flatter him, but they were thinking the same thing from the start. All right, since everyone agrees with my point of view, let's prepare for the army's retreat after daybreak. If there are no other questions, you can all go back. Yang Qindong waved his hand helplessly as if the matter had been settled. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.